Hi, guys, and welcome to History for Calm Nights. Tonight, we step with you into a countryside morning where the air is wet, the light is thin, and the smell of earth clings to everything you own. You stand there half awake, listening to birds you cannot name and a rooster that sounds far too confident for someone who never chops wood. This is not the cozy cottagecore fantasy you've seen online. This is the kind of life where, honestly, you probably will not survive this without modern heating antibiotics or even a decent pair of socks. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights. You wake before the sun because the cold decides for you. It presses against your cheeks and fingertips creeping through the thin walls of your cottage like an uninvited guest who never leaves. Your bed is narrow, shared and heavy with the smell of wool and last night's breath. The mattress beneath you is not soft in any modern sense. It is lumpy, stuffed with straw or chaff, and it crackles faintly when you shift your weight. Somewhere near your feet, a child mutters in their sleep. Somewhere nearer your head, another body turns, already preparing for the day without saying a word. You do not reach for an alarm. You listen instead. Wind brushes the thatch above you. Water drips steadily outside, reminding you that rain last night has soaked the ground and probably your boots. A cart rattles in the distance, early enough that you feel a flicker of pity for whoever is already working. Morning in rural England during the 1800s does not arrive gently. It arrives damp, cold and demanding. You sit up slowly, because rushing only makes the chill feel sharper. Your breath clouds the air. This is one of those moments that historians largely agree on. Without much argument, most rural homes in this period are poorly insulated, with heat escaping as quickly as it is made. The fire in the hearth has burned down to ash overnight, and unless someone tended it carefully in the dark, there is no warmth waiting for you. That job will come soon enough. For now, you swing your feet onto the floor. It is hard-packed earth, cold as stone. You pause because this is where your body starts to remember its place in the world. You are sore in familiar ways. Your hands ache from yesterday's work. Your shoulders carry a dull weight that never quite fades. This is not illness. This is just being alive here. You pull on clothes that were never truly dry. Linen scratches at your skin. Wool smells faintly of smoke and animal. Dressing is less about style and more about strategy. Layers are everything. Buttons are precious. A tear that grows too large might mean a week of extra cold. People sometimes imagine that rural villagers dress simply by choice, but in reality, clothing is expensive, time-consuming to make and repaired until it nearly forgets its original shape. Before you leave the bed, you reach for your shoes. They are stiff with yesterday's mud. You tap them together, hoping nothing living has crawled inside during the night. Here is a strange little detail from the period that still surprises people. Today, fleas are common enough that many families accept them as part of indoor life. Shaking bedding regularly and treating bites as routine annoyances rather than emergencies. It is itchy, uncomfortable, and entirely normal. You stand and stretch, careful not to bump your head on the low beam overhead. The cottage smells of damp wood ash and bodies. It is not unpleasant exactly, just dense like a story you cannot step out of. Light creeps through the small window, more grey than gold, and you notice condensation along the glass. Outside, the world is waking too. There is no private bathroom waiting for you. Washing means a basin of cold water, maybe warmed slightly, if someone is kind or organised enough to manage it. You splash your face, gasping quietly as the cold bites. Your fingers go numb for a moment. Cleanliness here is relative. People value it, but it bends to practicality. Full baths are rare, often reserved for special occasions or warmer months. A quick wash will have to do. As you dry your face with a cloth that has seen better decades, your mind drifts ahead to the day. Work waits, and it does not care how tired you feel. This is another widely accepted truth of rural life. At the time, labour structures the entire day, from dawn until light fails. Leisure exists, yes, but it is folded carefully into the margins. You glance toward the hearth, already thinking about the fire. Starting it again will take patience. A spark saved overnight is a small victory. Some households keep embers buried carefully in ash to coax them back to life. Others are not so lucky and must beg or borrow flame from a neighbour. There is something quietly social about fire in this world. Heat travels hand to hand. As you move, you hear the soft sounds of the cottage stirring. A child sits up, rubbing their eyes. Someone coughs deep and familiar. Outside, a cow, lowing in the distance, adds a slow bass note to the morning. You pause for just a second, breathing it all in. Scholars still argue whether rural people of this era felt this routine as oppression or simply as the natural rhythm of existence. Was this a life endured or a life accepted without much question? Standing here now, toes numb, stomach already hollow, you suspect the answer changes day by day. You take one last look at the dim interior before stepping fully into the morning. The day has begun, whether you're ready or not. And as you open the door and let the cold wrap around you again, you understand something quietly important. This life is not about comfort. It is about persistence, and you are already practicing it. You step back inside with the cold still clinging to your sleeves, and the cottage feels no warmer than the outdoors, just quieter, as if the walls are holding their breath. The morning has that in-between quality, not fully day, not fully night, a greyness that makes even familiar corners look slightly unfamiliar. You want to wash properly, to feel human, but the tools for that are humble and stubborn. A basin sits on a table or a low bench, its rim chipped its surface, dulled by years of scrubbing. The water inside is not steaming. It is not even comfortably cool. It is the kind of cold that makes you hesitate, as if your body is negotiating terms with your own intentions. You dip your fingers in, first, then your hands, and the shock travels up your wrists. Your skin tightens, your breath catches, you tell yourself it is fine. You tell yourself this is normal because it is. You splash your face and wipe your neck, the places where sweat and smoke gather. The water carries away a thin layer of yesterday, and for a moment you feel lighter. But you also feel the limits of this routine. Soap exists, yes, but it is not always abundant, and it can be harsh, made from animal fat and lye, strong enough to leave your hands dry, and cracked if used too often. This is one of those steady truths we can say with confidence. Many households rely on simple washing with water, and cloth saving stronger soap for laundry and heavier cleaning. Your hair is another matter. It may be tied back or covered, kept under a cap or scarf that is more about practicality than fashion. You might comb it with a simple comb, picking through tangles. Lice are a problem people rarely boast about, but they are a reality, and regular combing is part hygiene, part defense. You do it without drama, as if it is just another chore on the list, because it is. Then you dress, and dressing is not a single action. It is a sequence of decisions. Which shirt is least damp? Which stockings have fewer holes? Whether the patched sleeve will hold another day? You pull on linen first, then wool, and the wool feels almost comforting, even as it scratches. Your clothes smell faintly of smoke, because smoke is everywhere, woven into the fabric of your life. You tug at cuffs, tie strings, fasten buttons. Buttons are small, but they matter. Lose one, and you have a gap that wind will happily exploit. There is a particular kind of frustration that comes with putting on clothing that never really dries. Rain, fog, mud, and sweat leave their mark. Even if you hang things near the hearth, the air is so damp in many parts of rural England that you can chase dryness for days and still not quite catch it. You pull on your outer layer, perhaps a smock or a rough coat, and it settles on your shoulders like a familiar burden. You check your boots again. Mud has hardened along the seams. Leather is stiff. If the boots are not yours alone, you share them in the household, trading turns, making do. You slide your feet in and feel the cold leather press around your toes. You do not complain out loud. Complaining does not warm anything. And then there is the small matter of looking presentable. Rural life is practical, but appearance still signals respectability. And respectability can mean the difference between being treated with basic kindness or being dismissed as careless. You smooth your hair, wipe your hands, adjust your collar. Not for vanity exactly, but for dignity. For the quiet sense that you are still a person, not just a pair of hands. As you do this, you might remember something you have heard passed around in the half-joking way people trade little bits of knowledge, a quirky old practice, the kind that makes you raise an eyebrow even now. Some rural folk beliefs recommend rubbing certain herbs into the skin to ward off illness or bad luck, or pinning a small charm inside clothing for protection. You might have heard of carrying a piece of rowan or a coin with a particular date. It is not official medicine, and it is not church doctrine, but it lives in the spaces between where people try to control what they cannot control. Whether you believe it fully or just keep the charm, because it cannot hurt you, understand the logic. When life is fragile, even a small ritual can feel like a hand on your shoulder. You step toward the hearth again, because warmth is still a goal, and because the day will go better if you can coax the fire back into something useful. The ashes are pale, the room smells faintly of last night's peat or coal. You poke gently, searching for a surviving ember. Sometimes you find one, a small red eye hidden under grey dust. Sometimes you find nothing but cold ash and disappointment. If there is an ember, you treat it like treasure. You feed it carefully with tinder, dry bits of straw, a twist of old cloth. You blow softly, not too hard, because a careless gust can smother as easily as it can ignite. If there is no ember, you make the choice you hate. You will have to go to a neighbour. You will wrap yourself tighter and step out into the damp air, carrying a small pot or a shovel to bring back a coal, walking quickly so it does not die on the way. This is an everyday kind of dependence that modern life has trained you to forget. Here, borrowing is not a sign of weakness. It is part of the village's shared survival. Historians still argue whether such routines created stronger communal bonds or simply reinforced the constant awareness of scarcity. When you have to ask for fire, does it make you closer to your neighbour, or does it remind you that you are never fully secure? Maybe both. Back inside, if you have managed to revive the flame, you hold your hands out toward it, palms open. The warmth is slow. It does not rush to meet you. It is earned. You feel your fingers thaw. You feel the tightness in your joints ease just a little. The fire crackles softly, and that sound is almost soothing, like a promise that the day might be survivable. Now, with the first heat returning, you look at the rest of the cottage. Bedding must be shaken. A corner must be swept. A pot must be set. There is always something. But you take one small moment to notice how the light is changing. The grey outside is becoming a dull silver. The birds are louder. Somewhere nearby, a door creaks open, and you hear a voice call out, not a greeting, exactly more like a signal that the world is fully awake. You adjust your clothing one more time and breathe in the scent of smoke and damp wool. You are dressed. You are washed as much as a person can be washed on a winter morning in a rural cottage. You are ready, or at least ready enough, and you step into the next part of the day with the quiet understanding that comfort is not a guarantee here, but routine is. Routine, in its own strange way, becomes your blanket. The fire is awake now, not roaring, but steady enough to give off a thin warmth that clings to your knuckles when you hold your hands near it. That small comfort makes your stomach speak up more boldly. Hunger in this life is not polite. It does not wait for a convenient moment. It announces itself early, and it stays with you in the background like a low drum beat. Breakfast is the first negotiation of the day. Not a feast, not a leisurely spread, but a calculation. What do you have? What can you spare? What must you save for later? You glance toward the cupboard, or the shelf, or the hanging bag where food is kept away from mice. Your eyes land on the staples. Bread if there is any left, oatmeal, a bit of cheese perhaps if you are lucky, or a scrape of dripping saved from yesterday. Sometimes an egg, but not every day, and not without a reason. Here is a solid, well-supported reality of rural England. In the 19th century, many working families rely heavily on bread porridge and tea, with meat appearing less often than people imagine. You might taste bacon on a Sunday, or when a pig is slaughtered and the household has a rare burst of abundance. But on an ordinary morning, the food is simple. It is designed to carry you through labour, not to entertain your palate. You pull a pot closer to the hearth. The iron is cold at first, then slowly warms as it sits near the flame. If you have oats, you measure them with a practiced hand, not with a neat measuring cup, but with a sense that has been trained by repetition. Too much now means less later. Too little now means weakness in the field. You add water, maybe milk if the household can spare it, and you stir as the mixture thickens. The smell is plain, earthy, a little sweet, and it fills the cottage in a comforting way. If there is bread, it is coarse, dense, perhaps made from wheat, if the household is better off, or mixed with other grains if not. Bread is not always white and fluffy. It is often brown heavy, with a crust that can feel like work for your teeth. But it is food, and that matters more than softness. You listen to the sounds of others waking fully now. Children shift closer to the hearth, drawn by heat like moths. Someone coughs again, and you hear the scrape of a chair leg on the floor. A kettle, if you have one, is placed to warm. Tea is not only a drink, it is a ritual, a small daily anchor. Even when sugar is scarce, even when the tea is weak and reused, the act of holding a warm cup feels like civilization. Still, class hides inside breakfast in a way you cannot ignore. You might know just down the lane there is a farmhouse where butter is spread without counting the knife strokes, where eggs appear more easily, where bacon is not a rare event. In your cottage, you might scrape a thin layer of something onto bread and call it enough. You do not resent the food itself, you resent the unevenness of it. Or perhaps you do not even let yourself think of resentment because it wastes energy. You serve what you can. Bowls are simple, spoons may be wooden or worn metal. You hand a portion to a child, watching their face as they begin to eat. There is a quiet tenderness in that, a quiet worry too. Children need more than you can always provide, so you give them the best of what is there, and you tell yourself you can manage. As you eat, you taste smoke in the air, and you taste the faint bitterness of oats, and you feel the warmth of the bowl against your palms. The porridge settles into you like ballast, grounding you. You chew slowly, because even rushed mornings have a rhythm, and because eating too fast makes the stomach complain later. There is often talk in modern retellings of people in the past being endlessly cheerful about simple meals, as if poverty turned everything into wholesome gratitude. The truth is more complicated. You might be grateful for food, yes, but you might also be tired of the same flavours, the same textures, the same hunger that never fully disappears. Your relationship with breakfast is practical, sometimes affectionate, sometimes weary. And then a small odd detail slips into your mind. The kind of thing you hear from older women, from neighbours, from someone who swears their grandmother did it and never caught a fever. A strange fringe habit, half superstition, half household hack. Some people add a pinch of soot or ash to certain mixtures, believing it helps the stomach or wards off sickness. You do not know if it works. You're not sure you want to try it, but you understand why ideas like that circulate. When professional medical care is expensive and distant, the kitchen becomes the pharmacy, and the line between remedy and rumour blurs. As you finish eating, you glance at the kettle. If tea is ready, you pour it carefully. The steam curls upward, and you breathe it in before you drink, letting the warmth fill your nose and throat. You might add a tiny bit of sugar if there is any. Sugar is not merely sweet, it is a luxury, a signal that the household is doing well enough, at least for today. Historians still argue whether the spread of tea drinking among working families improved health through boiled water, or whether the reliance on tea and bread reinforced a diet lacking in variety and nutrients. Sitting here, you can see both sides. Tea means hot water, safer water. Tea also means a habit that can replace heartier options when money is tight. You wipe your mouth with the back of your hand because there is no paper napkin waiting. You rinse a bowl if there is water to spare. You might save the last drips of porridge for a younger child. Nothing is wasted casually. Waste feels almost immoral when you have so little margin. Then you stand feeling the food settle, feeling the day's weight return to your shoulders. Breakfast is done, not with a flourish, but with a quiet shift from nourishment to movement. Outside, the light is brighter now, still muted by clouds, but strong enough to show you the muddy path, the hedges, the fields waiting. You take one last sip of tea and it burns your tongue slightly, because you are impatient. You swallow anyway. You set the cup down, you breathe out, and you step toward the door carrying the taste of oats and smoke and weak tea with you, like a simple, steady promise that you have at least enough fuel to begin. You step back into the main room of the cottage and feel how small it truly is once the morning motions begin. In your mind, a cottage sounds charming, like a postcard, with roses climbing the doorframe. In your body, it feels like a box that has to contain everything a life can possibly need. Sleeping, cooking, washing, mending, storing, nursing, arguing, making up and trying not to freeze, all happen within these few paces. If you stretch your arms out, you can almost imagine touching two walls at once, and on certain days you might actually do it. The air holds layers of scent. Smoke from the hearth clings to the rafters. Damp wool releases a faint animal warmth as it dries slowly, grudgingly. There is the sour edge of yesterday's washing water and the earthy smell of boots that never fully escape mud. Even the food smell lingers, a quiet ghost of oats and weak tea. Nothing vanishes quickly in a room like this. It settles, it stays, it becomes part of you. You glance around, taking stock without thinking too hard about it, because taking stock is what keeps you alive. A small table scarred by knives and hard use, a bench that wobbles if you sit too sharply, a few stools, maybe one chair if the household is fortunate, shelves with crockery that does not match, a hanging rack with onions or scraps of bacon if there are any, and perhaps a bundle of herbs drying upside down, because herbs are food, medicine, and hope all at once. The hearth is the true centre. It is not decorative, it is the engine. The sound of it is your background music, a soft crackle, the occasional pop of resin or coal. You find yourself listening for changes in that sound because it tells you what the fire is doing. Is it starving? Is it too fierce? Is it about to smoke you out? You adjust a piece of fuel with a poker or a stick, and the flame responds almost like an animal being coaxed into a better mood. One thing that is broadly documented about rural working households in 19th century England is that many of these homes are cramped and often shared by large families, sometimes with lodgers too, when money is tight. Privacy is a luxury. If you want a moment alone, you take it in your head, not in your space. Even the act of dressing can be a kind of performance, turning your back, shifting behind a hanging cloth, pretending a corner is a room. Your eyes drift to the sleeping area. Maybe there is a bed frame, or maybe it is a wooden box filled with straw. Maybe the children sleep on a pallet near the hearth, close enough to feel the last warmth. You notice the bedding. It is thick, often heavy with wear, and it looks like something that should be shaken and aired whenever the weather allows. On a damp day, airing is a fantasy. You do what you can. You beat the blankets gently, sending dust into the light, little particles, dancing like they are enjoying themselves. The walls have their own language, whitewash perhaps, if someone has had time to maintain it. Soot marks above the hearth that never fully disappear. A crack in the plaster that has been there so long, it feels like part of the design. If there is a window, it is small. Glass is expensive. Some cottages have panes that are uneven, wavering the view outside, as if the world is underwater. Light arrives in modest amounts, and you make your peace with shadows. You run your hand along a shelf and feel grit under your fingers. Dirt is not a moral failure here. It is an environment. It enters on boots, on hands, on wind. Sweeping helps, but sweeping is a temporary truce. You sweep anyway because there is comfort in the motion. The broom is rough, made of twigs, bound together, and it scratches the floor as you push dust toward the door. Then there is the sound of the cottage itself. Wood creaks, the thatch shifts slightly when the wind presses against it. A mouse might skitter along a beam, bold enough to be heard. You pause, listening. Mice are not cute in this context. They are competitors. They can ruin food stores, chew cloth, and spread illness. You keep things hung up when possible, and you set simple traps. You accept that you will never truly win. Somewhere near the door, you spot a small object that is easy to overlook. A shoe turned upside down, on a shelf. a bundle tucked into a corner. A strange little protective charm, perhaps, because people in rural villages often lay a folk practice on top of daily life. There is a known oddity from parts of Britain that turns up in stories and finds the idea of keeping a worn shoe hidden in a house to ward off bad luck or harmful forces. Maybe your family does it. Maybe your neighbour swears by it. It is not a grand ritual with trumpets. It is quiet domestic superstition, the kind that lives comfortably beside prayer and practical labour. You move toward the small storage area, if you have one, a chest or a cupboard. You open it and see the household's real wealth. Not gold, not fancy objects. Cloth scraps, a spare candle, a bit of string, a handful of nails, a button saved because it might match something later. These are the treasures of necessity. You have learned that the smallest item can become the difference between coping and failing. You glance at the doorway and think about the boundary between inside and outside. In winter, that boundary is brutal. Cold air finds every gap. People use what they can to stop drafts, stuffing cloth or straw into cracks, hanging a heavy curtain, even leaning boards against the door. In summer, the same door becomes your relief, letting air flow through the cottage, carrying out smoke and heat. The cottage is not only a shelter, it is also a workplace. You see it in the tools leaning against the wall, a sickle, a hoe, a bucket, a half-mended harness. Everything waits for the next task. The room is restless because life is restless. Even when you sit, the room seems to insist that something needs doing. And there is the question that researchers still circle around when they talk about these homes. Did people find them comforting, close and communal, or did the constant lack of space create stress that modern minds would recognize instantly? You can feel both possibilities at once. There is warmth in being near others. There is also exhaustion in never escaping them. You take a breath and let your eyes soften. You have lived with this room long enough that you know its moods. How it smells when rain is coming, how it sounds when the fire is hungry, how it feels when everyone is quiet, because the day ahead is heavy. You touch the table, the hearthstone, the door latch, small, familiar points that anchor you. Then, with the cottage settled into its morning rhythm, you turn toward the next set of chores. The room does not change, but you do. Your posture shifts from noticing to doing, from observing to enduring. And as the fire snaps gently behind you, you carry the cottage with you, not just as a place, but as a constant companion that shapes every hour you are awake. You are still near the hearth because you always end up near the hearth. Even when your hands are busy elsewhere, part of your attention keeps drifting back to that small, stubborn source of heat. The fire is not a background detail in rural England. It is a responsibility, a risk, a comfort, and a daily test of patience. You crouch and look into the grate. The flames you coaxed earlier have calmed down, settling into a steady burn, with a faint orange glow underneath. The room is warmer by a fraction, just enough that your fingers no longer feel like they belong to someone else. You do not take that warmth for granted, because it can disappear quickly if you misjudge the fuel. First, you check what you have. Wood if you have access to it, but not always the dry kind that lights easily. In some areas, you might rely on peat stacked and dried, smelling earthy and sweet when it burns. In other places, coal becomes more common over the century, especially as transport improves and it becomes easier to obtain. The choice is not simply preference. It is geography, money, and what the land gives you. One stable point historians describe across many rural households is that fuel is a constant concern, bought, gathered, bargained for, hoarded, and stretched. You reach for tinder. This is the humble art of firekeeping, and it is easy to underestimate until you have to do it with cold hands. You save scraps, dry straw, a twist of rag, a bit of paper if it ever appears in your life, in a way that feels disposable, which is rare. Sometimes you keep slivers of wood shaved thin, because thin catches faster. You learn to prepare the future in small pieces. You feed the fire carefully. Too much fuel at once can choke it, make it smoke waste. What you cannot afford to waste, too little can let it fade. You place a piece of coal or peat or wood like you are arranging a small structure, building a home for heat. There is a rhythm to it. Lay, wait, listen. Adjust, wait, listen. The fire talks back in crackles and sighs. It is almost conversational if you have lived with it long enough. The smoke is your constant opponent. You want the warmth without the sting. You want the flame without the thick grey haze that makes eyes water and lungs complain. Many cottages have chimneys by the 19th century, but not all chimneys draw well, and even good ones can misbehave in certain weather. Wind shifts, damp air presses down. The smoke curls back into the room and sits there like a sulking animal. You open the door a little to improve the draft, then close it again because the cold tries to rush in. You are always balancing. Warmth versus air, smoke versus chill. If you do it wrong, you cough for hours. If you do it well, the fire becomes a quiet ally. You scrape ash from yesterday into a bucket or a pile. Ash is not merely waste. It has uses. It can go into the garden as a simple soil amendment. It can be part of making lye, which leads to soap, which leads to cleaner clothes. Even the residue of heat has value here. That is one of the most consistent features of this kind of life. Almost nothing is truly thrown away. As you work, you think about how the day's shape depends on this flame. No fire, no warm drink, no hot meal, no chance of drying clothes, no place for children to warm their hands. The hearth is also where you might heat water for washing softened food, and if illness visits, try to create a more comfortable space for someone shaking with fever. Then there is the worry that sits alongside this necessity. Fire can betray you. Thatch burns quickly. Wooden beams do not forgive mistakes. If a spark leaps and catches the wrong thing, your entire world can become smoke and ruin in minutes. This is not melodrama. It is an everyday risk that makes you cautious. You keep the area around the hearth as clear as you can. You watch the flames, you smell for anything that seems wrong. A familiar bit of village talk comes back to you, one of those half-serious, half-teasing practices. Some people swear that placing a certain object near the hearth keeps the fire from turning on the house. A horseshoe hung close by. A sprig of something dried and sacred in the mind. It is not official. It is not written in any rule book. But it is the kind of fringe household habit that blooms wherever people feel vulnerable. You might not admit you believe it, but you might still do it, because belief has a practical side when you live this close to risk. You settle into the task of keeping the fire alive throughout the morning. Someone will go out soon, but you need the hearth to hold steady first. You bank the coals, tucking them closer together so they last. This is a skill. You learn to make a fire that does not blaze dramatically, but stays patient, enduring, like a person who has accepted a long day ahead. The debate among historians is not about whether fire was important, that is obvious. The lingering question is more emotional. Did people experience the hearth as a heart of home, a comforting symbol? Or did they experience it mainly as labour, another duty that never lets you relax? You can feel the answer shifting depending on the hour. When you warm your hands, it feels like comfort. When you crouch again for the 10th time to adjust a smoking pile of fuel, it feels like work. At some point, you might send a child to a neighbour for a small coal, if yours are low, carrying it carefully in a covered pot. Or you might do it yourself, stepping out into the damp morning and returning quickly, guarding the ember like a fragile secret. There is a quiet intimacy in that exchange. The neighbour does not make a speech about generosity. They hand you heat, and you hand back thanks, perhaps with a promise of something later. In villages, debts are often measured in favours, not contracts. Back at your own hearth, you watch the flame settle again. You set a kettle to warm, because tea is not only for breakfast, it is for courage. It is for the middle of a morning when the cold creeps back into your bones. You listen as the water begins to whisper, then hiss, then give off the first curls of steam. That sound is strangely calming, like a soft lullaby made of boiling water. You stand up slowly, knees stiff from crouching, and you brush ash from your hands. Your palms are blackened. Your nails hold a dark line that will not disappear no matter how much you scrub. This is the mark of a working life, and it follows you everywhere. The fire is stable now. Not generous, but steady, enough to hold the cottage together for another hour. You look at it one last time before turning away, because you have learned that even when you leave the room, the fire is still part of your attention. It is like having another living thing in the house, one that requires care, gives warmth and demands respect. And as you step toward the next chores waiting in the day, you carry the sound of crackling behind you, the smell of smoke in your hair, and the quiet certainty that in this world keeping a flame alive is not just about comfort. It is about survival, repeated patiently, one careful breath at a time. With the fire settled into a steady mood, you feel the day pushing you outward. The cottage has done what it can for you. It has sheltered you, offered a thin warmth, given you a place to swallow breakfast and wake your limbs. But now the outdoors calls not politely, not as a gentle invitation, more like a hand on your back, nudging you toward labour. You gather what you need with a kind of automatic efficiency. A tool, maybe a hoe or a fork, a coil of twine, a small knife tucked away for practical tasks. You check your pockets for anything that matters. A bit of bread for later, a scrap of cloth. Your hands move without ceremony, because the morning does not reward hesitation. You glance at the door and notice the draft again, a cold thread slipping through the gap. Later, you might stuff it tighter. Later is always a tempting lie. When you step outside, the air hits you with damp force. The ground smells of wet soil and crushed grass. Your boots sink slightly, and the mud clings as if it wants to come along. The sky is a pale grey, the kind of sky that makes you squint, even though it is not bright. A bird calls from a hedge sharp and quick. Somewhere farther away you hear the dull thump of hooves or the creak of a cart. The village is waking into motion, each household spilling its people into lanes and fields. This is the point where the day truly begins, and it begins whether you feel ready or not. In many rural areas, agricultural work still sets the rhythm of life through the 19th century. Even as industry grows in towns, the countryside stays tied to planting, tending, cutting and gathering. It is an unromantic truth that people work long hours, often from early morning until fading light, especially during busy seasons. Your body knows this already. The muscles in your back tighten as if they remember before you even start. You walk toward the fields or the yard depending on your household's work. Maybe you're a farm labourer, hired by the day or the week, paid wages that never feel quite enough. Maybe your family rents a small plot and tries to squeeze a living from it. Maybe you do a mix, taking whatever work appears. Rural England is not one single story. It is many overlapping ones stitched together by weather and hunger. The path under your feet is uneven, dotted with stones, slick in places where water has collected. You keep your balance automatically. You have fallen before, everyone has. You pass hedgerows that form green walls along the lane. In summer they are thick and lively. In winter they are bare, revealing tangles of branches like old bones. The hedge has its own smell, sharp and leafy. And as you walk, you catch hints of last season's berries, shriveled now, still clinging. You meet someone coming the other way, a neighbour maybe, or another labourer. The greeting is brief, a nod, a few words. Conversation exists, but the day's work is always waiting impatient. There is a quiet understanding in these exchanges. Everyone is tired, everyone is moving, there is no need to narrate it. When you reach the work site, you see the tasks laid out like a list you did not write, but must complete. If it is spring, there is digging and planting. If it is summer, there is weeding, tending, and preparing for hay. If it is autumn, the harvest demands everything. If it is winter, there is repair work, hedging, mucking out, hauling, and whatever keeps the farm functioning when the fields rest. The land does not care about your personal feelings. It responds to time, rain, frost, and the stubborn insistence of growth. You pick up your tool and begin. The first minutes are always a shock to the body. Muscles complain, fingers stiffen. Your breath comes in short puffs. Then slowly you find the rhythm. The tool becomes an extension of your arm. The work becomes a repeated motion that you can almost sink into, like a rough kind of meditation. Lift, strike, pull. Lift, strike, pull. The sound is steady. The earth yields reluctantly. Mud sucks at your boots. A crow watches from a fence post as if judging your technique. You feel the weather in every detail, damp air against your cheeks, a thin drizzle that does not commit fully to rain, but still manages to soak you, wind slipping under your collar. Sometimes a rare sunbeam breaks through and warms your face for a moment, and you feel absurdly grateful, as if the sky has done you a personal favour. And this is where the modern mind might try to comfort itself with a fantasy. You might be tempted to imagine the countryside as peaceful as a place of quiet birdsong and gentle work. But you are here, and you know the truth is heavier. Your hands blister, your shoulders ache. You swallow irritation when your tool slips or when your back spasms. You keep going because the work does not reward stopping. A curious little bit of rural folklore drifts into your thoughts as you work the kind of thing someone might have whispered with a grin on a rainy day. Some labourers claim that if you start the first furrow or the first cut of the day with a particular phrase or gesture, the day will go smoother, the weather will hold, the tools will behave. It is not official and it is not universal, but it is one of those small superstitions that give the mind something to hold on to. When so much is uncertain, even a tiny ritual feels like control. As you labour, you notice the hierarchy around you. The farmer or overseer, if present, might not swing a tool beside you. They watch, they decide, they set the pace. Your wages depend on their judgment. If you're a day labourer, you might feel the constant anxiety of being replaceable. There are always others who need work. In lean times, you might accept lower pay or longer hours because the alternative is hunger. There is an ongoing debate among historians about how rural workers experienced these changes during the century, especially as enclosures, shifting land use, and the pull of industrial towns altered village life. Did people feel trapped by the countryside or anchored by it? Did they see the village as home or as a place that could no longer sustain them? You can sense that question even in small conversations, in the way someone speaks of a brother who left for the city, in the way another person clings to the idea of staying. The work continues. You pause to wipe sweat from your brow, even though the air is cold. Sweat is dangerous here. It cools quickly and leaves you chilled. You adjust your clothing, trying to balance warmth with movement. You breathe through the ache. You listen to the sounds around you, the scrape of metal on soil, the soft murmur of voices, the occasional laugh that bursts out unexpectedly, like someone has found a pocket of joy in the middle of labour. Time moves differently in the field. It is measured in tasks completed, not in minutes. You glance at the sky, trying to guess how much daylight you have. The clouds shift slowly. You keep working. And as the morning deepens, you feel the day settling into your bones. You have left the cottage behind, but you carry its warmth like a fading ember inside you. Outside, the land is wide and indifferent, and you are small within it. Yet you keep moving, because that is what life here demands. One step, one swing of the tool, one breath after another, until the next pause finally arrives. The work outside has a way of pulling your attention into a narrow tunnel. Tool, soil, breath, repeat. But even as you keep your rhythm, you notice how the day is stitched together by labour that is easy to overlook, the labour that rarely gets counted when people talk about the countryside. You have probably heard someone say, even in your own time, that rural women in the past stayed at home as if the home were a place where nothing happened. You almost laugh at the idea, not because it is funny, but because it is so wildly wrong. If you are a woman in this household, your morning begins long before the first field task is finished. If you are not, you still depend on it. Someone has to keep the cottage functioning while everyone else is out earning or working. The home is not a retreat. It is a second workplace, and it never closes. You picture it as you pause to catch your breath. A woman moving from hearth to table to washing basin, the same small steps repeated hundreds of times, each step carrying weight. She does not help. She runs a system. She maintains heat, food, cleanliness, and care, all with limited materials, and no convenient shortcuts. The cottage may look still from the outside, but inside it is constant motion. Laundry alone can swallow a day, clothes a few which sounds like it would make washing easier, but it does not. It makes every piece more important and more worn and more stubborn. Water must be carried from a well or a pump or a stream. It is heavy, sloshing cold against your hands. It must be heated, which means fuel, which means time and money. Then the scrubbing begins, hands working fabric against fabric soap that can bite the skin, rinsing again and again until the water runs clearer. Even then, clothes dry slowly in damp air hung near the hearth or outside when the weather allows. You can almost feel the rawness on your knuckles just thinking about it. This is something we can state plainly because it appears in so many accounts and observations of the time. Women's domestic labour in rural households is physically demanding and time-consuming, and it is essential to the survival of the family economy. Cooking, cleaning, childcare, caring for the sick, tending small animals, making and mending clothes, and often taking paid work as well, all blend into one long shift. You imagine the cooking pot simmering while other tasks continue. Bread might be baked when there is flour and time. Vegetables must be peeled, chopped, stretched. A bit of meat, if it appears, must be used wisely, because it might be the only taste of it for days. Bones are boiled for broth. Fat is saved. Nothing is wasted casually because waste is expensive. And then there is the quiet, emotional labour that never appears in neat records. Keeping children calm, managing tempers, softening the edges of worry. In a small space, tension has nowhere to go. It sits in the room like smoke. Someone has to open the door figuratively and let a little air in. Often that someone is the woman of the house, not because she is magically patient, but because she has learned that peace is practical. Even when women work in the fields during busy seasons, they often return to another set of tasks at home. You might picture her coming in with mud on her hem shoulders, aching and still having to stir a pot, wipe a child's face, mend a tear and plan tomorrow's food. It is not heroic in the grand dramatic sense. It is relentless in the quiet sense. You think about mending because mending is constant. A tear in a sleeve, a hole in a stocking, a missing button, all need attention. Cloth is precious. A skilled hand can turn scraps into usefulness. Patch on patch, stitch on stitch. The garment becomes a record of survival. There is a kind of artistry in it, but it is not performed for admiration. It is performed because cold does not care if the patch is pretty. A strange little countryside habit comes to mind, one of those domestic oddities that lives in the space between superstition and practical tradition. Some households keep certain herbs or objects near doorways or cradles, believing they protect mothers and infants from harm or illness. You might see a sprig tucked behind a beam or a small charm sewn into a child's clothing. It is easy to dismiss it as nonsense from the future, but you can feel the emotional logic underneath it. When childbirth is dangerous and disease is common, people reach for any thread of reassurance. You pause again in your own work and glance toward the cottage in the distance, or toward the idea of it if you cannot see it. You realize how much of village life depends on tasks that never earn a wage directly, but support everything else. A meal appearing at the right time. Clean bandages if someone is injured. A warm corner for an elderly relative. A baby soothed so others can sleep. These are not small comforts, they are infrastructure. And there is a question that historians continue to wrestle with. To what extent did women in rural communities view this labour as duty, as identity, or as exploitation? Some evidence suggests pride in competence in keeping a household running against the odds. Other evidence hints at frustration and exhaustion that could not be spoken too loudly. The truth, as always, probably sits in the messy middle. You can be proud and tired at the same time. You can love your family and still feel trapped by the constant demand. The day outside continues, but inside the rhythm is just as strict. If a child is ill, the whole schedule bends around it. If an animal escapes, someone must chase it. If a neighbour arrives with news, the conversation happens, while hands keep working. Life does not pause for a chat. The chat happens inside the work. You notice too how women often manage the household's social connections, borrowing a coal for the fire, trading eggs, sharing yeast, passing along a remedy. These networks are not official, but they are powerful. They keep people afloat. They also carry gossip, which can be sharp as a knife. A woman who can navigate those currents, who knows when to speak and when to stay quiet, holds a form of influence that rarely gets recorded. As the morning stretches forward, you feel the truth of it settling into your understanding. The countryside is not only fields, it is kitchens, it is wash tubs, it is cradles and needlework and careful budgeting. It is the patient management of scarcity. You return your focus to your own labour, but now you carry this awareness with you. When you picture rural life in the 1800s, you no longer see only men with scythes or carts. You see hands red from soap shoulders, bent over a pot, eyes tracking children, and fire and time all at once. You see work that does not announce itself, but holds everything together. And as the wind shifts over the field, bringing with it a faint smell of smoke from the village, you feel how the household's invisible labour reaches out and touches even this moment. The warmth you took earlier, the breakfast that settled your stomach, the clothes on your back, all of it comes from that constant unseen effort. The day moves on, and so does she, and so do you, each in your own rhythm, woven into the same demanding fabric of rural life. You keep working, but the sound you begin to notice more and more is not the scrape of tools or the steady murmur of adults. It is the lighter, quicker noise of children, small feet on hard ground, a sudden laugh that vanishes when someone calls their name, the soft whine of a complaint that turns into silence when a task is placed in their hands. Childhood here is not a long protected season. It is a short doorway into usefulness. If you have children in your household, you feel their presence like an extra weather system that must be managed. They wake early because the day demands it. They eat what is available. They dress quickly, in clothes that have been patched so many times the original fabric feels like a rumour. Then they are given work not as punishment, but as a matter of course. You might watch a child carry water in a small pail, the weight making their arm tilt awkwardly. You might see another sent to fetch a message running down a lane with cheeks red from cold. One clear, widely attested point about rural England through much of the 19th century is that children in working families commonly contribute labour both inside the home and outside it, and their tasks can range from childcare and errands to agricultural work, depending on age and season. Even when reform movements and schooling gradually expand, necessity remains stubborn. A family cannot always spare a child's labour, especially when wages are low and mouths are many. You notice how quickly children learn the village map. Not the official map, not lines on paper, but the lived map. Which neighbour is kind? Which lane floods after rain? Which farmer might offer a coin for a day's help? Where you can pick blackberries without being chased off. They learn it with a seriousness that can look almost adult. In the yard or near the fields, a younger child might be set to gather sticks, to watch a sibling, to scare birds away from a patch of crops by clapping or waving. Older ones might drive geese-herd cows, help with weeding, carry sheaves, or collect stones from a field. The tasks are often repetitive, but repetition builds skill. Their hands become competent early. Their bodies learn the language of work. You also see the way they play, because they do even here. Play is simply squeezed between responsibilities. A game with a hoopah, a carved wooden toy, a quick chase around a hedge. Laughter bursts out and disappears again, as if it is something slightly dangerous to indulge for too long. Some children sing while they work quietly, as if the song is a private way of making the day less heavy. A peculiar little childhood detail floats through your mind, the kind that can make a modern listener blink and then laugh softly. In some villages, children are sent out on certain days to call out for luck or gifts, a practice tied to older seasonal customs, where a small rhyme or chant is exchanged for a penny, a bit of food, or a treat. It is not universal, and it shifts from place to place, but it shows how folk tradition and childhood intertwine. Even when households are strict old customs, sometimes carve out tiny spaces for children to be children, even if only for a moment. Still, you cannot ignore the harder side, A child's small body tires quickly, yet the day keeps asking. Fingers go numb, feet get wet. A scolding lands heavy, not because the adult is cruel, but because there is no time for gentle negotiation when work must be done before weather changes. When a child cries, it is often swallowed quickly because crying does not make the bucket lighter. You imagine the inside of the cottage again, where a child might rock a baby, stirring a pot with one hand, half watching the fire. That image might surprise someone from the future, but here it is ordinary. A child becomes a second pair of hands, and the household leans on them. If schooling is available, it competes with work. Some families value the chance for a child to learn letters, to become someone who can read notices and write names. Others fear the loss of labour, or they cannot afford the small expenses of schooling, or the simple reality that the child's time is needed. And even when children attend, the rhythm can be irregular, shaped by harvest seasons and household emergencies. There is a continuing scholarly disagreement about how children themselves experience this balance of work and learning. Did they see labour as belonging, as pride in contribution, or as a burden that stole their childhood? The surviving voices, when we find them, offer more than one answer. It depends on temperament, on family warmth, on how harsh the work is, and on whether there is any sense of choice. You can imagine a child feeling proud to bring home a coin, and also feeling the sting of envy when another child's hands are cleaner. You watch a child in the field bend to pull weeds back, curved, face focused. Their seriousness is startling. It is the seriousness of someone who knows the weeds matter. Weeds steal crops. Crops mean food. Food means survival. The chain is simple and cruel, and even a child can understand it. Sometimes older children step beyond the village's small economy and into paid labour outside the home. They might be hired out for farm work, sent into service, or drawn toward industrial work in towns as the century advances. A child leaving home is not always framed as a tragedy here. Sometimes it is framed as opportunity. Sometimes it is a grim necessity. Either way, it changes the household, like removing a beam from a roof and hoping the rest holds. You also notice how adults speak to children. Not always sweetly, not always harshly, but often with a directness that can sound blunt to modern ears. There is less talk of self-expression and more talk of do the task. Yet within that directness, you sometimes find a gentle touch. A hand smoothing hair, a piece of bread slipped to the smallest one, a quiet joke shared while working. Love is there, but it wears practical clothing. As the morning moves on, you feel your own perspective shift. You stop seeing children as background. They are participants. They are labour. They are future wage earners. They are also the ones who will carry the village forward or leave it behind. Their small hands tug at the present and the future at the same time. You inhale and smell damp earth again, and you hear the thin voice of a child calling to another. The call is quick, and then it is swallowed by the larger sounds of the day. Work continues, but now you feel the presence of those small lives moving through it, learning it, being shaped by it. And as you lift your tool again, you sense that the countryside's rhythm is not only adult rhythm. It is a rhythm taught, early, practiced young, and carried forward one duty at a time. As the morning deepens, you begin to feel the shape of the world around you in a way that has nothing to do with maps on paper. You feel it in hedges, in gates, in paths that suddenly narrow as if they are trying to hide. The countryside looks open from a distance, rolling fields under a wide sky, but when you walk it you learn how many invisible rules are stitched into the land. You head along a lane bordered by hedgerows, the earth soft under your boots, damp and dark. The hedges are not merely pretty boundaries. They are living fences grown thick to keep animals in and people out to separate one man's claim from another's. You run your fingers along a thorny branch and pull back quickly. It bites. Even the plants here seem to understand property. In rural England during the 19th century, land is power and access to land shapes everything. You might not use those words, but you live their meaning. Who owns the fields decides who eats well. Who rents decides who worries. Who has rights to graze an animal, gather wood or cut turf is not just dealing with tradition, but with survival. This is one of those realities that can be stated with confidence. Changes in landholding and the enforcement of property boundaries, especially after the long waves of enclosure alter rural life in ways that linger through the century. You walk past a gate and notice the way it changes your movement. You cannot simply wander where you please. There are footpaths and you learn them like a second language. Some are ancient, worn into the earth by generations of feet. Others are newer or contested, a narrow strip through a field that someone might try to block with a fence if they think they can get away with it. You know which farmer tolerates passers-by and which one glares as if your footsteps alone are theft. The parish is not only a church and a set of records, it is also a social boundary. It tells you who belongs and who is watched. When you cross into another parish, even the air feels slightly different, as if you have stepped into someone else's household. People notice. They ask why you are there. They will still speak to you, but their eyes measure you. You pass the churchyard, maybe on the edge of your route, and you feel the quiet weight of it. Church bells do not ring now, but their presence is still felt. The parish is where marriages are recorded, baptisms, burials, and poor relief decisions. It is where reputations are built or broken. You could spend your whole life within a few miles and still feel like the world is large because boundaries keep it compartmentalized. And yet there are spaces that feel shared. A common, if it still exists here, or a patch of greensward near the village, a lane where children play, a stream where water is drawn. These shared places carry their own rules too, but they feel less sharply owned. You might hear laughter there, gossip, the sound of a bucket being lowered and lifted again. In those places, the village feels like one body. A small, odd countryside habit comes to mind as you walk, one of those little things that make the past feel strangely alive. Some people believe certain trees or stones mark places where you should not linger at dusk, not because of a practical danger, but because of what might be there in story. An old oak said to be haunted, a boundary stone where mischief gathers. You may not fully believe it, but you still find yourself quickening your pace when you pass certain spots. It is not fear exactly, it is respect for the village's imagined landscape, which can be as real as the physical one. You notice how land shapes social interaction. The farmer's house is set back larger with a yard that looks cared for. The labourers' cottages cluster closer together sometimes, along a road, sometimes tucked behind a hedge, almost as if they are trying not to be too visible. The very placement of buildings tells you who holds comfort and who holds endurance. You think about rights again, because rights here are not abstract. They are tangible. The right to glean after harvest, to pick up leftover grain. The right to gather fallen wood. The right to walk a path. These small permissions are lifesavers. When they are denied, life becomes tighter, meaner. You feel the tension in the way people talk about it. Quietly, often, because speaking too loudly can bring trouble. This is where the historian's question lingers, the one that keeps returning in different forms. Did rural communities see these boundaries as stable and protective, a way of keeping order? Or did they experience them as constriction and loss? The argument has many angles because rural life is not one emotion. Some people prefer clear boundaries because they reduce conflict. Others mourn the older sense of shared resources. You can feel that complexity in the village itself, in the way people both respect fences and resent them. You step off the lane for a moment and stand near a field edge. The soil is darker here, and the smell is rich. You can hear the faint rustle of animals in the distance. A cow chewing slowly, patient and indifferent. A dog barking somewhere behind a cottage, as if defending an invisible kingdom. You notice how quiet the countryside can be, and how it is not truly quiet at all. It is full of low sounds, wind in grass, a crow's harsh call, the faint clink of metal from someone working a tool, and always in the background the village's own hum. The land does not roar, it murmurs. As you continue walking, you feel the way the hedges guide you like corridors. They steer you toward where you are allowed to go. The path is worn by necessity, by habit, by rules. Your boots follow it almost without thought. This is how the countryside shapes the body. It teaches you where to step and where not to step. It teaches you restraint. You reach a point where the lane opens slightly, and you can see farther. Fields stretch out divided into parcels. In the distance, a line of trees marks a boundary. Perhaps beyond that is another village, another set of names, another parish with its own gossip and expectations. It is close and far at the same time. You take a slow breath and let the damp air fill your lungs. The landscape feels familiar, but also watchful. It holds you within it, not just physically, but socially. The village knows who you are because the land keeps you in sight, keeps you moving along predictable routes. And you know the village because every hedge, every gate, every path carries memory. As you turn back toward your day's work, you carry this sense of geography as something personal. It is not just scenery, it is a system. It decides who meets whom, who borrows what, who hears which rumours first. It decides who can walk freely and who must always feel the fence line in their mind. And as you step onward, you feel the countryside's boundaries settle around you like a quiet net. Not cruel on its own, not kind on its own, simply present, shaping every step you take. You are back in the thick of work again, and now your attention narrows to what your hands are doing and what your body is learning. The tool in your grip feels familiar, not because it is comfortable, but because you have held it so many times your palm has shaped itself around it. A scythe handle, smooth where fingers rub, a spade worn at the edge, a sickle's curve that catches the light in a brief dull blink. Your body carries knowledge that no book could teach you properly. It knows how to lift without throwing your back out most of the time. It knows the angle that makes a blade slice cleanly instead of snagging. It knows when the soil is too wet to work without turning it into glue. It knows the difference between a tired ache you can work through and a sharper warning that means you will pay for it tomorrow. This is one of those firm realities of rural labour that shows up again and again in accounts from the period. Agricultural work is intensely physical, often repetitive, and it requires practical skill built through experience. A person who cannot handle tools efficiently does not just look clumsy. They waste time, waste energy, and risk injury. In a world where money and food are tight, that matters. You begin with whatever task is in front of you. If you're cutting, you fall into the scythe rhythm. You plant your feet, you swing in a broad arc. The blade hisses through grass or grain. You feel the vibration travel up the handle into your arm. You adjust. You learn to let the tool do more of the work, because forcing it only tires you faster. The sound becomes steady like a slow brushing over and over. If you are digging or turning soil, the spade meets resistance. The earth does not always cooperate. You press your boot against the metal edge. Push down lever, the soil up and your shoulders take the weight. Each lift feels like a small contest between you and the land. Mud clings. Stones appear, as if they have been waiting to annoy you personally. You pull them out and toss them aside with a dull thud. Your hands are your most valuable tools, and they pay the price. Blisters rise, then harden into calluses. Cracks form at the knuckles. Nails break. Dirt wedges itself into lines your skin seems to grow for the purpose of holding it. Even when you wash, a faint stain remains, like the land has signed its name on you. You pause for a moment to adjust your grip and notice your breathing. Work has its own breath pattern. In swing, out. Lift out. When you are new to it, you gasp. When you have done it for years, you learn to pace yourself, to make your lungs steady so your limbs keep going. You keep your mouth slightly open in the cold so you do not feel like you are choking on your own effort. You glance at someone nearby and see the difference experience makes. The older labourer moves with economy. No extra gestures, no wasted swings. The tool lands where it should. The work flows. There is a kind of quiet elegance to it, even though nothing about it is easy. You feel a flicker of respect, not the kind you say out loud, but the kind you carry inside your chest. At some point you will need to sharpen. A blade that dulls becomes a punishment. You take out a whetstone, maybe carried in a pocket or tucked into a belt. You run it along the edge in careful strokes. The sound is soft, gritty, steady, a little ritual of maintenance. A little pause that feels almost peaceful compared to the larger labour. You test the edge with a glance, not with a finger unless you want to bleed. There is a small odd practice that people sometimes mention, the kind that sounds half joke, half serious. Some workers spit on the whetstone, or wet it with a certain kind of water, believing it gives the blade a better bite, or brings luck. Whether it changes anything physically is another matter, but the act itself carries meaning. It gives you the sense you are not only working, but working correctly, in the way the older hands insist is right. The weather continues to press into everything. A damp wind makes your fingers stiff. A sudden sunbreak warms your neck for a moment, then vanishes. Your shirt clings slightly with sweat, and you feel the risk of cooling too fast. You keep moving partly because you must, and partly because movement is warmth. The sounds around you are layered, the scrape of metal, the dull thud of soil, a distant shout, a dog barking, birds circling, and underneath it all the quiet, human sound of endurance, the small grunts, the exhalations, the muted curses that you keep to yourself because you're trying to stay respectable even when your back screams. You also become aware of how injuries happen, not with dramatic accidents most of the time, but with small slips, a blade nicking a finger, a thorn piercing skin, a strain in the back when you lift wrong because you're tired and rushing. There are no immediate clinics in the field. You wrap a cut with cloth. You rinse it if you can. You keep going unless it is truly bad. The body is both instrument and victim here. And this is where the bigger question rises, the one scholars keep circling when they talk about rural labour and health. How much of the wear and tear was simply accepted as normal ageing, and how much did people recognise it as damage done by economic pressure? Many rural workers lived with chronic pain without naming it as such. They were tired, sore stiff, and they called it life. You can feel that acceptance in your own movements. You adjust a shoulder and keep going. You shift weight away from a sore knee. You work around pain the way a river works around a stone flowing anyway. As the hours pass, you learn to read the land through your tool. A different vibration means you have hit a root. A different resistance means the soil is heavy with clay. A clean slice means the grass is dry enough. Your hands and your tool become a single sensing system. This is the kind of knowledge that makes a person valuable, even if they never become wealthy. You take a brief pause, leaning on the handle, and you watch your breath cloud the air. The field stretches out, divided by hedges, and in the distance you see someone else working, bent and steady. It is a quiet picture, almost beautiful if you forget the ache inside it. Then you remember, and the beauty becomes something more honest. It is beauty built on effort. You straighten and return to your task. The tool fits your grip again. The rhythm resumes. Your body keeps learning even when it hurts. And as you work, you feel how rural life shapes you, not only through the tasks you do, but through the way those tasks carve knowledge into your muscles, turning your own body into a record of the countryside's demands. As the morning pushes toward midday, the animals begin to pull your attention the same way the fire does. They are not background decoration. They are the living heartbeat of the household economy. The difference between a meal and an empty pot, between a warm blanket and a cold night. In rural England, animals are both co-workers and dependents. They work for you, you work for them, and the arrangement is never as simple as it sounds. You step away from the heavier field task for a moment and head toward the yard or the byre where the smells change. The scent of damp earth gives way to something warmer, sharper. Straw, manure, sour milk, animal breath. It hits you in a wave that is unpleasant, only if you have the luxury of being offended by it. Most days you do not. Most days it is simply information. It tells you who is nearby, what needs cleaning, what might be wrong. If you keep chickens, you hear them before you see them. The small scuffling, the cluck that sounds like complaint, the sudden flap of wings when one decides you are too close. Chickens are useful because they turn scraps into eggs, and eggs into coins, and coins into something else the household needs. You scatter feed watching quick beaks strike. If there is an egg in the nesting corner, you lift it carefully, feeling its smooth shell in your palm, like a tiny miracle that arrives without asking. If you keep a pig, the relationship feels different. A pig is an investment that eats loudly and demands attention, and then later becomes food in a way that cannot be ignored. You bring it slop a mash of scraps grain, maybe potato peelings. It grunts and pushes forward strong, insistent. The pig's presence is physical. It smells, it shoves. It reminds you that hunger is not unique to humans. Then there is the cow, if the household has one. And if you do, you treat it with a kind of wary respect. A cow is wealth on four legs. Milk means nourishment. It means butter if you can manage it. It means a bit of security. But cows are also stubborn heavy and capable of injuring you without meaning to. You approach carefully. You talk softly, not because the cow understands English, but because your tone does something to your own nerves. You check the animal's flank, its eyes, its posture. You have learned to notice small signs. A cow that shifts weight oddly. A chicken that sits too still. A pig that refuses food. These things matter. There is no veterinarian arriving on demand. You are the first line of care. Most of the time, you are the only line. This is a straightforward point that comes through in rural histories, and household accounts. Animals are central to subsistence and income, and their health directly affects a family's survival. The household may not have much cash, but it may have a hen, a pig, a cow, and those creatures are a form of savings, a form of insurance, and a source of daily output. You muck out straw. The smell is strong enough to make your eyes water, especially in a tight space. You lift soiled bedding with a fork, the straw heavy with moisture. You carry it out, adding it to a pile that will later feed the fields as manure. Even the mess becomes future fertility. The cycle is constant. Nothing is truly separate. The cow's waste will help grow the oats. The oats will feed the family. The family will feed the cow. It is all one looping system. A small odd detail surfaces in your mind, the kind of countryside belief that shows how intimately people watch their animals. Some villagers swear that a certain charm or spoken phrase can protect livestock from illness or misfortune, especially when a cow is about to calve or when disease rumours spread. A sprig hung in the byre, a mark scratched into a beam, a quiet whisper said in a particular way. It is not official science, but it is human. When your wealth is breathing and fragile, you reach for anything that might keep it safe. You prepare for milking, if that is part of your day. You wash the udder as best you can with warm water if you have it, or cool water if you do not. You sit on a low stool, your hands work in a practiced rhythm. The milk hits the pail with a steady, soft sound. It is almost hypnotic, that tapping splash, and for a moment your mind drifts. Then the cow shifts, and you snap back to attention. A careless kick can send the pail flying and turn your calm moment into a small disaster. You smell the milk fresh and sweet, and you think about what it represents. For some households it is for the table, for others it is partly for sale. But even when it is sold, it is never simply money. It is the difference between paying rent or falling behind. It is the difference between buying shoes for a child or patching an old pair again. You might carry the pail inside, moving carefully so you do not spill. You strain the milk through cloth, removing bits of straw or hair, because nothing here is perfectly clean. But you do what you can. The milk goes into a cool place if you have one, perhaps a pantry or cellar corner, and you keep an eye on it because spoilage is quick in warmer seasons. Outside again, you check fences. Animals test boundaries the way children do, except with more muscle. A loose board or a gap in a hedge can mean a cow wandering into a neighbour's field, and that means trouble, and trouble costs money or favours. You patch what you can with what you have. Twine, a nail, a piece of wood. You work fast because the day's other tasks are waiting. And there is a question that historians keep returning to when they talk about animals in rural households. Were animals primarily seen as economic assets, or were they seen as companions in any meaningful emotional sense? The evidence is mixed. People name animals sometimes. They speak to them. They feel loss when one dies. But they also live in a world where survival can require slaughter and sentiment cannot always interfere. You can hold affection and practicality in the same hand. You can scratch a cow's forehead gently, and still know that a pig is being raised for meat. You step back and look at the yard, chickens pecking, a dog trotting nearby alert, a cow chewing slowly indifferent to your human worries. You feel the constant movement of non-human life around you, and you realize how much the countryside is not just human labor, but animal labor too. The animals turn the day like gears. They produce, they consume, they require care, they create mess, they offer comfort in their own simple presence. You wipe your hands, the smell of animals still clinging to your skin. You breathe in and taste the air, a mix of straw and smoke and damp. The work with animals is not separate from the rest of the day. It threads through it, pulling you back to the yard again and again. And as you turn toward the next task, you carry the sense that your household survival is walking, clucking and breathing right beside you. By the time midday arrives, it does not announce itself with a bell or a neat pause the way it might in a modern office. It arrives as a shift in your body. Your shoulders feel heavier. Your stomach reminds you that breakfast was modest. Your hands begin to lose their early morning energy and settle into a slower, steadier endurance. You look up and notice the light has changed brighter, even when the sky is grey, and you understand you have reached the day's thin middle. There is usually a pause, but it is rarely generous. It is more like a breath taken between sentences. You step away from the tool for a moment, leaning on it, and you let your spine straighten slowly, as if it has forgotten how. The field stretches out around you, stitched together by hedges and narrow paths. In the distance you might see someone else doing the same, lifting a hand to wipe their face, shoulders slumping for a second, then tightening again. You find a spot to sit if you can, the edge of a hedge, a low bank, a patch of grass that looks less wet than the rest. You do not lounge, you perch because you know the body can stiffen if you let it relax too much. Rest is a careful thing here. Too much and your muscles lock up. Too little and you feel like you are moving through water. You take out what you have for midday food. It is not a full meal. It is a small holding action, a piece of bread wrapped in cloth. Perhaps a bit of cheese if you are lucky, maybe an onion sharp enough to sting your eyes when you bite. If there is cold bacon left from an earlier day, it is a prize, but it is not always there. You chew slowly, letting the food feel like it is doing more than it is. Hunger teaches you to appreciate even plain flavors, but it also teaches you to be realistic. This is not indulgence. This is maintenance. Then comes tea if it can be managed. Tea has become so woven into English life by the 19th century that it reaches even many rural working households, though often in a weaker, thriftier form than the wealthy enjoy. The leaves might be reused, the brew might be pale, sugar might be scarce, yet the importance of tea is not only taste. It is warmth, a brief comfort for the hands and throat. It is also very practically boiled water, which can reduce certain risks from contaminated sources. People do not always frame it that way, but the effect matters. If you are near home, someone might bring tea out, or you might return briefly to the cottage. If you are far, you might have a small tin or bottle, or you might simply wait until later. Either way, the thought of tea alone can lift your mood a fraction. It is funny how something so small can feel so powerful when your day is mostly effort. You sip slowly if the tea is hot, letting it roll down your throat. The warmth spreads through you like a gentle hand. You breathe out and feel your jaw unclench. For a moment, the world feels softer. You listen to the low sounds around you. A bird calling, wind moving through the hedge, the faint voices of others, not talking loudly, just exchanging small words. This is where a little rural oddity slips in, the kind of detail that feels almost like a wink from history. In some households, especially when tea is stretched thin, people sometimes toast bread hard enough that it nearly becomes a biscuit, then soak it in tea to soften it again, turning a small amount of drink into something that feels more filling. It is not glamorous, but it is clever. It is the kind of improvisation you become good at without ever putting a name to it. You look at your hands while you rest. The skin is rough, darkened by soil and work. There is a cut near one knuckle, already starting to scab. You flex your fingers slowly. They ache. You think about how the body carries the day, not only through strength, but through small adjustments and quiet tolerance. The conversation around you, if any, often has a certain tone at midday. It is not dramatic, it is practical. Someone might mention the weather, because the weather decides everything. Someone might mention a landlord or a rent day coming, and the words are cautious as if trouble might overhear. Someone might mention a relative in town, and you feel the distant pull of other possibilities. And there is a question historians keep turning over when they study rural routines like this. Was the midday pause a moment of community, a shared break that strengthened bonds, or was it simply a necessary physical stop in a schedule that remained fundamentally exhausting? The evidence can point both ways. Some people describe companionship, in these moments laughter, shared over a crust of bread. Others describe eating in silence, too tired to speak, too aware of how little there is. You can imagine either. You can feel both. You finish what you have and wipe your mouth with the cloth or your sleeve. There is no fussing. You pack away what remains, if anything remains, and you stand carefully. This is the tricky part. When you stand after resting, your muscles protest as if you have betrayed them. Your knees feel stiff, your back tightens. You shift your weight, stretch a little, and wait for your body to remember its working shape. Before you return fully to the field, you take one last moment to look around. The countryside at midday has a particular stillness. Not silence, but a slow, suspended feeling, as if the world is taking a breath with you. The hedges stand like dark lines against lighter fields. The sky moves in slow clouds. Even the animals seem calmer, chewing, dozing, waiting. Then the pause ends, not with a loud signal, but with a simple decision. You pick up your tool again. The handle is familiar. The weight is the same as it was in the morning, but your arms are a little heavier now. You set your feet, you breathe in, you begin again. The tea's warmth lingers for a moment, a small internal ember. It does not change the reality of the work, but it changes your experience of it by a degree. Sometimes that is all you get, a degree of comfort, a minute of softness, a sip of warmth, enough to carry you into the afternoon. The year is not a backdrop here. It is a supervisor. It tells you what to do and when to do it, and it does not care if you're tired. As you move into the afternoon, you feel time not as a neat line of dates, but as a wheel. You keep riding season after season. The countryside teaches you to think in cycles. Seed time, hay time, harvest. Then the long stretch of winter repairs and waiting where hunger can creep closer. You can sense the season by smell. In spring, the earth has a raw, fresh scent, like something newly opened. In summer, the air carries warmth and green sweetness, and there is a steady hum of insects. In autumn, you smell damp leaves and the sharpness of cold returning. In winter, everything smells quieter, smoke heavier, air thinner. Work changes with each turn. Spring brings digging, sowing, mending, fences, the careful hope of putting seed into soil and trusting it will become food. You watch hands scatter grain, each motion, both ordinary and full of risk. A late frost can ruin the promise. Too much rain can rot seed. Too little rain can starve it. You cannot control it. You can only do your part and then wait. Summer is when the land feels most alive, and it is also when your workload can feel endless. Weeding is constant. Animals must be watched. And then hay arrives, and hay is urgency. The grass must be cut and dried and gathered while the weather holds. A sudden rainstorm can undo days of effort. You can almost feel the panic that comes with dark clouds when cut grass lies in the field. Everyone moves faster. Children help. Women help. Anyone with hands helps. Hay time makes the village feel like a single organism, all muscles and breath. Then harvest comes, and harvest is the great turning point. This is one of those long-standing, well-documented realities in many rural communities. Harvest time demands the most concentrated labour of the year, and the success or failure of it shapes winter survival. The days can stretch long with light used until it is no longer possible to see. There is a certain heaviness in the air during harvest, a mix of straw dust, sweat and the sweet smell of grain. Your throat scratches from it. Your eyes sting. You keep working anyway. There is also a strange kind of satisfaction in harvest, even when you're exhausted. You can see the result. You can see the field changing. You can feel the weight of a sheaf in your arms and think this is real, this matters. Yet you also know the harvest is not yours in the way you might wish. Much of it goes to the landowner. Much of it pays rent. Your portion is measured and uncertain. You learn to feel joy and caution at the same time. After harvest, the landscape changes. Fields are stubbled, hedges look sharper, the air turns colder, and then winter closes in, and winter is a different kind of work. Less of the dramatic group labour, more of the steady maintenance. Repairing tools, mending clothes, feeding animals, hauling fuel, fixing fences battered by wind. Winter is when you feel the house's weaknesses more clearly, when you notice every draft like it is personal. And winter is also when hunger can become its own season. Not always starvation, but the slow thinning of food stores. You feel it in smaller portions in meals becoming simpler in the way people talk about spring, as if it is salvation. A curious seasonal practice floats into your mind, one that sits on the edge of tradition and oddity. In some places, people keep a small piece of the last harvest sheaf hanging it in the house or storing it carefully, believing it carries luck into the next year's crops. It is not a scientific guarantee, but it is a symbolic one. It says we survived this harvest, and we want to survive the next. When you live by seasons, symbols become practical in their own way because they support your nerves. You also notice how the seasons shape community life. Summer brings fairs gatherings, moments when people are outdoors longer and talk more. Winter pulls people inward into cottages, into closeness, into gossip by the hearth. Spring brings cautious optimism. Autumn brings a kind of grim focus. And there is an ongoing scholarly discussion about whether rural people experience time as primarily seasonal and cyclical, or whether the 19th century's spread of clocks, rail timetables, and wage labour began to push even countryside life toward more measured modern timekeeping. You can feel that shift at the edges. Some tasks still depend entirely on daylight and weather, but others begin to depend on schedules, on being at a place at a certain hour, on wage agreements that care less about the sun and more about the employer. Still for you, the season is the loudest voice. You can plan, but you cannot command. A wet summer means more worry. A dry summer means different worry. A mild winter brings relief. A harsh winter can bring fear. As you work, you picture the year as a line of pressures. Spring pressure to plant, summer pressure to cut and dry, autumn pressure to gather, winter pressure to endure. Each season has its own sounds. Spring has birds and the soft slap of mud under boots. Summer has scythes swishing and insects humming. Autumn has the rustle of dry stalks and the thump of sheaves. Winter has the crackle of fire and the whistle of wind through thatch. You also feel how seasons shape the body. In summer you sweat and worry about water. In winter you shiver and worry about fuel. In harvest you move faster than you think you can. In winter you slow down, not by choice but by stiffness and cold. Your hands change with the year. Your skin changes. Your mood changes. You take a breath and notice the air again. Whatever season you are in, it is present in your lungs. It tells you what comes next. It tells you what you must prepare for. And as the afternoon continues, you feel the seasonal wheel turning behind every task. Even the simplest job, like tightening a fence wire or stacking a bundle of straw, is part of the larger story. You are not only working for today, you are working to catch the season before it runs away from you. Because it will. It always does. And the countryside does not wait for anyone to catch their breath. By the time you reach the part of the day when errands become possible, the countryside feels like it is leaning toward the village again. Work does not stop, but it shifts. There are moments when the field tasks loosen their grip, just enough for you to think about supplies, about what you need, about what might be traded or bought if you have the means. The idea of a market day or a travelling seller enters your mind like a faint scent of possibility. If you are lucky, there is a market within reach, perhaps a nearby town, where people gather on certain days with baskets, carts, and patience. If you are less lucky, you rely on peddlers, hawkers, and the occasional wagon that rattles through the lane, bringing small goods to people who cannot easily leave their work to travel. Either way, this is when the countryside feels connected to something bigger than hedges and parishes. You walk toward the village centre or along the lane where sellers tend to pass. You can hear it before you see it. Voices calling out the clink of metal, the soft shuffle of feet. The air smells different too, a mix of damp wool horse sweat, and sometimes something sweet like baked goods that feel almost unreal in a life mostly built on staples. Markets in the 19th century are not only places of commerce, they are places of information. You learn who is hiring, who is sick, who is leaving for the city, what prices are doing, whether grain is dear this year, whether the landlord is planning something. In a rural world with limited newspapers and limited time, the market becomes a living bulletin board. This is a well-grounded fact about the period market towns serve as hubs for rural districts where agricultural goods are sold and household necessities are purchased, and these exchanges shape rural economies and social life. Even if you cannot attend often, the ripple reaches you. Prices rise and you feel it. Prices fall and someone else feels it. News travels along these same pathways. If you have something to sell, it is often small. Eggs wrapped carefully, a bit of butter, a bundle of surplus vegetables, perhaps a piece of knitted work. You carry it with the cautious pride of someone who knows every item represents hours of effort. You set it down and watch as other hands examine it, testing weight, freshness, quality. You negotiate not with dramatic bargaining, but with quiet calculation. A penny here matters, a halfpenny matters. If you are buying, you look first at necessities: salt, flour, soap, a needle, a bit of thread, sometimes a candle. You feel the cost like a pinch in your chest. Money has a physical sensation when you have little of it. You count coins, you weigh what you can do without. You hear your own internal voice saying, "Not today, not this week, make do." And then there are the peddlers, the ones who come to you. They arrive like small moving shops. They carry ribbons, buttons, cheap trinkets, pots, and sometimes news from farther away. You watch them with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. A peddler might sell you something useful, or might sell you something that falls apart in a month. Yet even a questionable seller can be entertaining. They talk quickly, they flatter, they promise. They bring a bit of brightness into an otherwise repetitive landscape. A quirky market detail slips in here, the kind that makes you smile despite yourself. Some sellers offer patent remedies. Little bottles or packets claim to cure everything, from coughs to melancholy. The labels are grand, the claims are outrageous. You might not buy them, but you might listen, because the performance is almost worth the price. And sometimes people do buy not because they are foolish, but because hope is a commodity too. You move among stalls or alongside the peddler's cart and you notice the range of people. Farmers in better boots, labourers in worn coats, women with baskets, children darting between legs, a local official perhaps keeping an eye out, and always the hum of conversation, layered and restless. This is where you feel the village's social machinery at work. You nod to people you know. You pretend not to see someone you are avoiding. You hear your name spoken softly and wonder why. You smile anyway. Reputation travels fast here, and markets are where it gains speed. You hear someone mention a price for bread grain that sounds worse than last year, and you feel a tightening. If grain is dear, winter will bite harder. If it is cheap, perhaps there will be fewer desperate weeks. These small numbers become emotional weather. People talk about them with the same seriousness they talk about frost. And there is a question historians continue to explore. Did markets and increased rural access to goods make life feel more connected and hopeful, or did they sharpen awareness of inequality by putting luxuries directly in front of people who could not afford them? You can sense both truths. Seeing fine cloth and bright ribbons can lift the spirit. It can also remind you of what you do not have. You stand near a stall with fabric running your fingers over it, feeling the difference between coarse cloth and something smoother. Your hand hesitates. You imagine a dress, a shirt, a new cap. Then you imagine the cost. You let your hand fall away. Maybe another time, maybe never. You turn towards something more practical, like needles or soap, because practicality wins most days. Still, you might allow yourself one tiny indulgence if you can. A sweet bun, a piece of fruit that is not usually on your table, a bit of spice, something small enough that you can justify it as morale. You taste it and feel the brief, almost shocking pleasure of flavour that is not plain. It makes you remember you are more than work. Then the market ends, not with an official closing, but with people drifting away, baskets lighter or heavier carts, turning back toward lanes. You carry your purchases carefully. You keep coins hidden. You walk with a slightly quicker pace, partly from excitement, partly from caution. The countryside feels quieter again as you leave the market noise behind. As you return toward home, you feel the way these exchanges tie your rural life to a wider world. Goods come from somewhere else. Ideas come from somewhere else. Even rumours come from somewhere else. The village is not isolated, even when it feels that way on rainy mornings. It is connected by paths, by carts, by peddlers' voices, by coins passed from hand to hand. And you step back into the familiar lanes with a basket that holds not just objects, but the faint sense of a world beyond hedges waiting and moving, whether you can afford to follow it or not. By late afternoon, money begins to feel like its own kind of weather, pressing against your thoughts, even when you try to focus on physical tasks. You can ignore it for an hour, if you're busy enough, but it always returns tapping you on the shoulder like someone who will not take a hint. Rent, wages, debt, the price of bread, the cost of boots. It is all there humming quietly in the background of your day. You walk back from a field edge or from an errand with your mind already counting. Not in neat columns, not in tidy arithmetic, but in a rough, anxious way. You know what you owe. You know what you might earn. You know the gap between the two sometimes feels like a ditch you cannot cross. If you are a labourer, paid by the day, your income is never fully secure. Weather can cancel work. Illness can steal it. A farmer can decide they do not need you this week. If you are paid by the week or the year, you might have slightly more stability, but even that stability can be thin. Wages in rural England through much of the 19th century are often low and contested, and families frequently rely on multiple earners or supplementary work to make ends meet. This is one of those realities that comes through in many discussions of rural poverty and labour, and you feel it not as a statistic but as a daily tension. Rent adds another layer. If your family rents a cottage, it is likely tied to employment or to a landowner's permission. A cottage can be a home and also a leash. Lose the job, lose the cottage. Fall behind on rent and the fear of being turned out sharpens. That fear is not always spoken out loud, but it is present in the way people save scraps of food and keep a bundle of essential items ready. Just in case. You think about the landlord not necessarily as a villain, but as a force. Sometimes a distant force, sometimes a very personal one. The landlord might never set foot in your cottage, but their decisions shape your life. Repairs might be delayed, rent might rise, rules might shift. A new steward might enforce things more strictly than the old one. You have no control over those changes, and that lack of control sits heavy. You carry a memory of rent day the way the village mood changes when it approaches. People speak more carefully. They avoid certain subjects. They watch the lane for whoever collects payments. The sound of a cart coming toward the cottages can make your stomach tighten. You feel it now, even if rent day is not today, because it lives in your body like an old bruise. Sometimes you must borrow. Borrowing is common, but it is also delicate. A neighbour might lend a coin. A shopkeeper might allow credit, but credit is not free. It is a social relationship with pressure built in. It can create gratitude, resentment, obligation, and shame all at once. You might accept help with a forced smile, then lie awake, later worrying about how to repay it. The village remembers debts. Even when people are kind, they do not forget. A peculiar little money habit comes to mind, one of those small details that shows how creative people can be when coins are scarce. Some families keep coins hidden in the most unlikely places, sewn into clothing seams, tucked into a crack behind a beam, placed under a loose floor tile. It is not just fear of thieves. It is fear of oneself spending too quickly, fear of a sudden emergency, fear of someone in the household finding it and using it without agreement. Saving becomes almost secretive, like protecting a tiny flame. You look at your hands again, dirt under nails, and you think about how much effort a single penny represents. A long hour, a sore back, a task done in cold rain. The coin itself is small, but the labour behind it is enormous. That is why spending hurts. It is not just money leaving your pocket, it is the memory of how hard you worked to get it. You also notice how money divides the village in ways both obvious and subtle. The farmer's children might wear shoes that fit properly. The labourer's children might wear shoes that are slightly too large or slightly too small, stuffed with rags for warmth. Someone with more money might buy better fuel and keep their cottage warmer. Someone with less might burn whatever they can find, even if it smokes. The differences are visible in clothing, in posture, in the way people speak to certain officials, in who feels comfortable walking into a shop. And there is an ongoing question among historians about how rural people understood poverty during this century. Was poverty seen mainly as personal failure, as some harsh moral voices claimed, or was it understood as structural, tied to wages, land and power? The evidence suggests both interpretations existed often in conflict. You can feel that conflict in the way people talk about the deserving poor and the idle poor, even when many of those labels do not fit reality. You can feel it in your own thoughts when you worry about being judged for misfortune. You also feel how money pressures shape relationships in a household. Arguments can flare over small expenses. A child asking for a treat can cause a tension that feels unfair to everyone. A spouse might want to save for something important, while another wants to ease daily discomfort. Neither is wrong. Both are tired. Both are trying to survive. You hear someone mention a looming rent increase or a poor harvest year, and the talk spreads like cold through a room. People do not panic dramatically. They tighten. They become quieter. They begin to plan. Planning might mean taking on extra work. It might mean sending a child to service. It might mean reducing food. It might mean moving, if moving is possible. You walk toward home with the weight of these calculations pressing your thoughts. The day's work might be done, or nearly done, but the financial work never ends. It is always there, measuring your life in coins and obligations. As you approach the cottage, you see the small signs of thrift everywhere. The patched clothes, the reused twine, the careful saving of ash and scraps. All of it is part of the economy of survival. You step inside and feel the familiar smell of smoke and damp, and you realize money is not only something you count, it is something you feel, something that shapes how warm you can be, how fed you can be, how safe you can be. You set down what you carry and your mind continues its quiet arithmetic. Tomorrow. Next week, rent day, the price of bread, the cost of fuel. You breathe out slowly, trying to let the worry settle instead of racing. And as the light outside begins to fade, you understand that in rural England, the day is never only physical labour. It is also the labour of making a life out of too little, again and again, with patience, with ingenuity, and with an endurance that does not always look heroic, but always matters. The day begins to tilt toward evening, and the village starts to change its posture. The fields feel a little quieter, the lane becomes a little busier, with people returning baskets in hand, shoulders slumped, boots heavy with mud. And somewhere above all of it, you hear the bells. Not constantly, not always loud, but present enough that you feel them in your sense of time. Church bells are not only about worship, they are the village's heartbeat, calling, warning, reminding. You might be heading toward the churchyard now. Not because it is Sunday, but because the church sits at the centre of village life, even on ordinary days. It is a landmark, a meeting point, a place where news travels and reputations settle. The stone of it looks colder than the cottages, more permanent, as if it expects to outlive everyone who passes through. On Sundays, of course, the church becomes the village's stage. People wash as best they can. They wear the cleanest version of their clothes. They try to look respectable because respectability is a kind of social currency. A clean collar can do more than you would think. A neat cap can signal pride, and pride can protect you from being dismissed. It is broadly true and visible in so many rural accounts that church attendance and the parish structure shape community life in 19th century England, not only spiritually, but socially and administratively. Baptisms, marriages, funerals, the recording of names, and often the administration of local welfare all touch the parish. Even if your personal faith wobbles, the institution still holds power over the rhythm of your life. You step into the church on a Sunday in your imagination, and the air changes immediately. Stone holds coolness, the smell is damp and old, a mix of wax wool and the faint mustiness of centuries. Wooden pews creak under shifting bodies. People settle into places that feel assigned, even if no one admits it. There is a quiet hierarchy in where people sit. Some families occupy certain pews year after year. Others stand or sit wherever space allows. You might try not to notice, but you do. Everyone does. The sermon begins and you listen half thoughtful, half distracted by how hungry you will be by the time it ends. The words might comfort you or irritate you depending on the preacher and your own week. Some sermons are gentle, others are sharp, heavy, with warnings about morality, thrift, and obedience. You feel the weight of being watched not only by God, but by neighbours. There is a strange little countryside quirk that slips into this world too, because folk tradition does not vanish just because a church exists. Some villages follow little rituals about church life that are not official doctrine at all, like the belief that stepping into the church with the wrong foot first brings bad luck, or that certain pews are unlucky because of an old story attached to them. You may roll your eyes at it, yet you might still hesitate for half a second before stepping, because the village's shared imagination is a powerful thing. After the service, the churchyard becomes a social corridor. People cluster in small groups. They exchange greetings, sometimes warm, sometimes cautious. They ask after relatives. They comment on the weather. They trade small pieces of news. Children fidget, dogs wander, someone laughs, someone whispers. The minister might move among them, shaking hands, offering a word. This is where the village's judgment can feel sharpest. If you miss a Sunday, people notice. If you arrive late, people notice. If your clothes look too worn, people notice. If your children misbehave, people notice. You can feel their eyes like a light, not always cruel, but constant. And yet the church can also be a source of comfort and stability. In a life filled with uncertainty, a familiar ritual can feel grounding. The same hymns, the same prayers, the same bell sound. It offers a sense that something is steady even when the harvest is not. The parish is also where rules and charity intertwine. If you are struggling, you might have to appeal to parish officials or rely on informal support that often moves through church networks. Help can come with conditions, and conditions can sting. Receiving aid can bring relief and also shame. Some people try to avoid it until they truly cannot. Here the historian's question becomes slippery and complicated. To what extent did religion and church life create genuine community support, and to what extent did it enforce social discipline and hierarchy? The evidence is mixed because human experience is mixed. Many people found real solace in faith. Many also felt the pressure of moral judgment, especially the poor, who are often expected to prove their worthiness. You feel that tension in your own position. You might believe deeply. You might be uncertain. You might be annoyed by certain sermons. Yet you still attend because the church is part of the village's social fabric. It is one of the places where you are seen. Outside the church, the bells fade and you return to your day. The light is different now, softer, leaning toward evening. You walk down the lane and the village feels like it is drawing inward again, like a creature preparing to rest. You pass cottages with smoke rising from chimneys. You smell dinners beginning. You hear the clatter of pots. You hear a child crying briefly, then quieting. You sense the domestic world picking up speed again as field work slows. And you carry the church with you, not as an isolated building, but as a presence that shapes how people speak, how they behave, how they judge, and how they help. The bell sound echoes faintly in your head, a reminder that in rural England, community is not only about shared labour and shared weather. It is also about shared rituals, shared expectations, and the constant awareness of being part of a village that watches you, supports you, and sometimes squeezes you tighter than you would like. When the churchyard conversations fade and the village lanes begin to empty, you feel another force take over, one that is softer than a landlord's demand, but sometimes sharper than any official rule. Gossip. It moves through a rural community like smoke slipping into cracks, curling around corners, settling where you least expect it. And just like smoke, you can try to avoid it, but you will still taste it. You walk back along the lane and sense it in the smallest gestures. A pause when you pass, a glance exchanged between two women near a doorway, a voice dropping just as you come within earshot. The village is not large enough for anonymity. Your name lives in other people's mouths. Some days it is spoken kindly. Some days it is spoken like a warning. This social web is one of the most consistent features of small rural communities. People rely on one another for help, for borrowing, for news, for survival. That closeness creates warmth, but it also creates surveillance. Everyone notices everything because there is nothing else to notice. The rhythm of the day repeats so any change stands out. A new coat, a missing child, a bruise, a raised voice heard through thin walls. It all becomes material. You step into your cottage, and even there you are not fully out of reach. Sounds travel. A laugh, a quarrel, a baby crying. If your door is open, a neighbour might call in a greeting that sounds casual, but also carries a quick assessment. How are you doing? Are you well? Are you coping? Their words might be genuine. They might also be gathering information. Sometimes it is both. You begin evening chores and you feel the village around you like a second skin. You cannot live here without relationships. If your fire dies, you need a coal from someone. If you are ill, you need someone to fetch a midwife or a remedy. If a child wanders off, you need eyes on the lane. This dependence can be comforting. It can also feel like being constantly on display. You think about favours. Favours are the currency that sits alongside coins. A neighbour lends you a bucket. You lend them yeast. You watch their child for 10 minutes. They bring you news. These exchanges build a net that can catch you when you fall. But nets can tangle too. If you refuse a favour, people remember. If you fail to repay one quickly enough, people talk. If someone believes you're taking more than you give, your reputation shifts. And reputation matters more than you might like. It can determine whether someone will hire you, whether a shopkeeper will extend credit, whether your children will be treated kindly, whether the parish officials will see you as deserving. You might be honest and still suffer from rumour. You might be flawed and still be protected by a strong family name. The village is not always fair, it is simply close. A strange little social quirk comes to mind, one of those bits of tradition that shows how people handle tension without saying too much outright. In some villages, insulting rhymes or teasing songs are used to shame people publicly without a formal accusation, especially if a couple is seen as behaving badly or if someone breaks certain social expectations. The words can be playful on the surface, but they sting. The village uses humour as a weapon. It is a way of enforcing norms without a courtroom. You feel the threat of that, even if it never happens to you. You learn to keep your head down. You learn which topics to avoid. You learn when to smile and when to pretend you did not hear something. You learn that silence can be a survival skill. Yet gossip is not only cruelty. Sometimes it is warning. Someone whispers that there is sickness in a nearby cottage, and suddenly you are more careful with water, more attentive to coughs. Someone mentions that a farmer is looking for extra hands, and that news becomes opportunity. Someone says a peddler is dishonest, and you are saved from wasting a precious coin. Information is power, and gossip is how information travels here. There is also comfort in it, strange as that sounds. When you are worried about rent or illness, or a child's future, talking about someone else's drama can feel like a brief relief. It is a distraction. It is a shared story. It can make you feel less alone. Still, there is a question historians keep returning to when they study village life. Did these tight social networks create resilience and mutual supports, or did they create stress and control, limiting personal freedom? The answer is not neat. A village can save you and suffocate you in the same week. The same neighbour who lends you a coal might later repeat something you said in confidence. The same group that brings you soup when you are ill might also decide you are not respectable enough to deserve sympathy. You see it in grudges too. Rural communities remember a conflict over a boundary line, a borrowed tool not returned, a harsh word said during a bad winter. These things can sit for years, passed along like heirlooms. Children can inherit grudges the way they inherit eye colour. They grow up hearing who is trustworthy and who is not. And yet, because you cannot escape one another, grudges also sometimes soften. People make peace not because they have forgiven, but because they need to function. They share a lane, a church, a market, a well. They cannot afford permanent warfare. As evening approaches, you hear voices outside, neighbours returning from work. You might exchange a greeting, a short comment about the weather, a remark about the price of bread. These small words are like stitches holding the social fabric together. Inside, you prepare for supper or for the next day's tasks, and you think about what you will say tomorrow and what you will not. You think about what parts of your life are safe to share and what parts must be kept private, even in a place where privacy barely exists. You think about how quickly stories can twist as they travel. You settle near the hearth for a moment, letting the warmth touch your knees, and you listen. The village sounds drift in, a laugh from 2 cottages away, a dog barking, the distant creak of a cart, and beneath those sounds, the faint sense of conversation, continuing without you, the village's invisible mouth always moving. You take a slow breath and remind yourself that you are part of this. You cannot live here without the village, and the village cannot exist without the constant exchange of words, favours and watchful attention. You can hate it and need it at the same time. You can fear it and rely on it at the same time. And as the light outside turns softer, you feel the day's labour giving way to the village's other work. The work of social survival, where every glance and every whisper can matter more than any tool you hold. As the village settles into its evening rhythm, there is another thread running through rural life that you can almost feel tightening across the 19th century. Letters, words, the quiet power of being able to read a notice, write a name or understand a message without needing someone else to translate the world for you. Literacy is not just a skill, it is a kind of leverage. And in a countryside built on hierarchy, leverage matters. You might have grown up with little schooling or none at all. Or you might have been lucky enough to attend a small village school when reform movements and changing laws began to push education outward. Either way, you have seen the difference it makes. A person who can read can navigate life differently. They can follow instructions on a seed packet. They can read a contract at least in part. They can recognize when someone is trying to trick them. Even if their world is still bounded by wages and landlords, their mind has an extra door. There is a clear, widely accepted fact in the story of 19th century England. Access to schooling expands over the century, shaped by a mix of religious organisations, philanthropic efforts, and eventually state involvement, and literacy rates rise as a result. But in the village, that broad trend does not feel like a smooth line. It feels like uneven chances. Some children attend regularly, others attend only in winter when farm work is lighter. Some never attend at all, because the household needs their labour more than it needs their letters. You picture a small schoolroom, perhaps attached to a church, or supported by a local benefactor. The smell inside is a mix of chalk dust, damp coats, and the faint sourness of many children packed together. Wooden benches, slates, a teacher's voice, trying to hold order. Children reciting letters or numbers, some eager, some restless, some exhausted. Learning here is not always gentle. Discipline can be strict. The teacher might use sharp words or even physical punishment because the expectation is obedience and progress, not self-expression. If you are a child in this world, the school day can feel like a strange break from physical labour, yet still a kind of labour. Sitting still is hard when you are used to moving. Holding a slate pencil feels unfamiliar. Your hand cramps as you form letters. You might feel pride when you finally write your own name. You might feel embarrassment when you cannot keep up. If you are a parent, you weigh schooling against necessity. A child in school is a child not earning, not helping, not carrying water, not watching a younger sibling. Even if you believe letters matter, you may not be able to spare the time. And if schooling costs even a small fee, or requires clothes that look respectable enough, you may hesitate. The choice is not always about values, it is often about survival. A curious little village detail slips in here, something that shows how people sometimes treated literacy as almost mystical. In some communities, a person who can read well might be asked to write a charm or a protective verse for someone to be folded and kept in clothing or placed in a home, not because the words have legal power, but because written words feel powerful. Even if you do not believe in magic, you understand how writing can seem magical in a world where not everyone can do it. Ink on paper looks like authority. Outside the school, literacy appears in other ways. A posted notice on a wall, a handbill about a fair, a printed sermon, a newspaper brought in by someone from town. These texts are small windows to the larger world. They also carry ideas about improvement, about morality, about how rural people should behave. The 19th century is full of voices telling the poor how to live better, how to be cleaner, thriftier, more disciplined. Sometimes those voices are helpful, sometimes they are patronizing, often they are both. You can feel the tension in the village between old knowledge and new. Old knowledge is practical. How to read weather signs, how to heal with herbs, how to mend a tool. New knowledge is printed. It arrives as advice, rules, and opportunities. The two do not always blend easily. Some people embrace schooling as hope. Others resent it as interference, especially when it seems to pull children away from necessary work. This leads into a question historians still wrestle with. Did expanding education in rural areas primarily empower working families by opening opportunities, or did it also serve to discipline them, teaching obedience and social norms that benefited the existing hierarchy? The answer depends on the source you read and the community you study. In your village, you can sense both forces. A child learning to read can dream of something beyond the hedge. A child learning to obey can also become easier to manage. You picture a teenager who has learned enough to take a position in service, perhaps, or to work in a shop in town. Literacy becomes a ticket not to wealth, but to a different kind of life. And that possibility begins to tug at rural families, especially as the century advances and the pull of towns grows stronger. At the same time, education can sharpen awareness of inequality. A child who learns to read might also learn that the world is larger than the village, and that some people live with comfort that feels almost mythical. They might read about distant places, about politics, about invention. That knowledge can inspire. It can also create restlessness. Once you know there is another way to live, it becomes harder to accept your own constraints, without question. As evening deepens, you might sit by the hearth while someone reads aloud. If the household has a reader, a Bible passage, a pamphlet, a letter from a relative in town, the sound of words filling the room feels different from the sound of work. It feels like a widening. Even if you are tired, you listen, letting the story carry you for a moment. If no one can read, you still hear stories. Oral storytelling remains strong. Songs, rhymes, news repeated from mouth to mouth. Literacy does not erase that. It adds another layer. The village becomes a place where words travel in two forms, spoken and written, each with its own authority. You watch the fire flicker and think about the future. A child learning letters today might leave tomorrow. A child who stays might still carry a different kind of confidence. Either way, the quiet presence of schooling is changing the countryside, not all at once, but steadily, like water carving a channel. And as you settle into the evening's slower pace, you feel the weight of the day easing slightly, replaced by the soft, persistent idea that knowledge, even in small doses, can shift a life's direction. In a world of hedges and rent and weather, a few written words can be a kind of light. As the day slides further into evening, your thoughts drift toward the quiet threats that hover around rural life like a second weather system. Illness, injury, the cough that lingers too long, the fever that rises too quickly, the cut that looks small until it becomes something worse. In your world, health is not a private matter. It is a household matter, a village matter, because sickness does not respect boundaries, and there are few safety nets waiting politely in the background. You step into the cottage and notice the signs that someone might not be well even before they say anything. A child whose cheeks are too flushed, an older relative sitting too still, a neighbour's voice sounding strained when they greet you. You have learned to listen for the rough edge, in a cough the fatigue that clings to a sentence. Sometimes you pretend not to notice because noticing means worry. Sometimes you cannot help it. In rural England during the 19th century, professional medical care is often limited by cost, distance, and availability, especially for working families. That is a steady, broadly observed reality. Doctors exist, but they are not always accessible. Hospitals are not nearby for most villagers, and even when help can be found, the fear of expense can delay action until it is too late. As a result, the household becomes the first clinic, and neighbours become an informal health network. You look at the shelf where small remedies might be kept, a jar of dried herbs, a bottle of something strong-smelling, a lump of camphor, a cloth for compresses. Nothing is labelled neatly. You know what it is because you've been taught, because someone older has told you, because you have watched it used. If a child has a cough, you might make something warm a drink with honey, if there is any, or a simple infusion of herbs. If a fever rises, you might cool the body with cloths dipped in water, or you might try to encourage sweating, depending on what you believe and what you have seen work. If someone has stomach trouble, you might offer peppermint or a bland gruel, or simply rest and hope. Much of this is comfort care, even if you do not call it that. It is what you can do. And the village's knowledge is a mixture of practical experience and older belief. You might have heard advice passed along with absolute confidence. Do this. Do not do that. Wrap the throat. Keep the feet warm. Open a window for fresh air. Keep the patient away from drafts. Some of these rules contradict each other, and you pick the one that fits the situation and your own instincts. A strange fringe detail slips into your mind, the kind that makes you pause and blink even though you've heard it before. Some people swear by placing certain objects under a pillow or near a sickbed to draw illness away, like a peeled onion, a piece of bread, or a charm. You cannot prove it works. You might not even believe it fully, but you can understand why it persists. When you feel powerless, you reach for actions that make you feel less powerless. You might also use remedies that have a stronger physical effect. Mustard poultices, hot compresses, onion or garlic preparations. These can feel like you're doing something, and sometimes they do bring relief. But they can also irritate skin or make a patient miserable. The line between help and harm can be thin when knowledge is uneven and desperation is high. If injury happens, you respond quickly because you have to. A cut from a tool, a splinter, a burn from the hearth. You rinse, you wrap, you keep the wound as clean as you can. Cleanliness here is limited, but you do not ignore it. You know infection is dangerous, even if you do not use modern language for it. You have seen what happens when a wound goes bad. You have seen swelling heat-red streaks, and the way a person can fade within days. Those memories sit behind every minor injury, like a warning. The village also has people with reputations for healing. A wise woman, a midwife, someone who knows herbs well, someone who has helped in births or treated fevers for years. They are not officially trained in the modern sense, but their experience is real. Their hands know what to do. When someone is sick, you might send for them first because they are close and they understand your world. This brings you to one of the persistent questions historians debate. To what extent did folk medicine in rural England provide effective care based on observation and tradition? And to what extent did it perpetuate practices that offered comfort but little real benefit? The evidence does not allow a single answer. Some remedies likely helped. Some likely did nothing. Some likely harmed. Yet the emotional and social function of these practices is undeniable. They gave people a framework for action. You think about childbirth too, because even when the day has nothing to do with it, the village carries that reality like a constant undercurrent. Birth can be a moment of joy. It can also be a moment of danger. Midwives are crucial, and women support one another through these events, bringing cloth broth, hot water, steady hands. Men might be kept out of the room waiting restless. Children might be sent to a neighbour. The cottage becomes a small medical space where everyone holds their breath. When sickness spreads, fear spreads with it. A rumour of fever in one house can make others avoid visits or wash more carefully or whisper about what might be coming. Yet people cannot fully isolate. They still need waterbred help. The village continues half cautious, half resigned. You notice how illness changes the household's rhythm. Work still needs doing, but now it is harder. Someone must take over tasks for the sick person. Someone must watch children, while also watching the patient. Food must be made in a way the sick can swallow. Water must be carried. The fire must be tended. Care becomes another layer of labour. And yet there can be tenderness in it, quiet tenderness that shows up even in harsh circumstances. A hand on a forehead, a spoon offered gently, a blanket pulled higher. A neighbour bringing a small gift, an egg, a bit of broth, not because they have plenty, but because they understand what it is to worry. You sit by the hearth in the evening and listen to the sounds of the cottage, someone breathing, someone shifting, a child murmuring, the fire crackling. Outside, the wind presses against the thatch. The world feels both fragile and enduring. You think about how much of life here depends on the body holding together. When the body fails, everything else wobbles. That knowledge makes health feel precious, not in a sentimental way, but in a practical way. You treat a cough with seriousness. You treat a fever with caution. You treat a wound with attention. And as you settle into the evening's slower pace, you feel the weight of uncertainty that comes with living without modern medicine's safety net. Yet you also feel the resilience of people who learn to care for one another anyway, with whatever knowledge they had, whatever herbs they could gather, whatever comfort they could offer. The day ends, but the body's work continues in sleep and recovery, in endurance. And you understand that in rural England, health is never a simple personal matter. It is woven into the whole fabric of village life, as constant and as unpredictable as the weather. The evening air outside the cottage feels colder now, as if the day has spent its warmth and is turning its pockets inside out. You step onto the lane for a moment, perhaps to fetch water, perhaps to check on an animal, perhaps just because you need a breath that does not taste of smoke. And as you do, you feel the shadow that hangs over many rural households, even when everyone is healthy and working, the workhouse. You might not say the word often, but it sits in your thoughts like a dark landmark. It is not just a building, it is an idea. It is what people threaten their children with. It is what adults whisper about when money gets tight. It is the place that exists as a last resort, and the fear of it shapes behaviour long before anyone actually steps through its doors. In the 19th century, especially after the Poor Law reforms of the 1830s, workhouses become central to the system of poor relief in England and Wales, designed to be harsh enough that people would avoid them if they possibly could. That basic structure is widely recognised, and you feel its influence in village life. It is not simply about charity, it is about deterrence. Help is available, but it comes wrapped in discipline and humiliation. You think about what it means to be in the parish. Your parish is not only where you worship and where your name is recorded, it is also where you are judged if you cannot support yourself. If you fall into destitution, you may have to apply for relief, and that process is not gentle. People ask questions. They measure your worthiness. They decide if you are truly in need or simply not trying hard enough. Even if you have worked your whole life, Even if misfortune has done most of the damage, you still feel the sting of being examined. You have seen the way villagers talk about those who go to the workhouse. There is pity sometimes. There is also suspicion. People worry about becoming that person. They worry about being labelled. The fear is not only hunger, it is loss of identity. Once you enter, you are no longer simply yourself. You become a pauper, a word that carries a heavy weight. You picture the workhouse in your mind perhaps from the outside. A large institutional building, more solid than cottages, often grim in appearance. You imagine the sound of its doors closing. You imagine the separation of families, men from women, children, from parents, because the system often treats the family unit as something to be controlled rather than protected. Even if you have not personally been inside, you have heard enough stories to fill in the gaps. A strange and chilling little detail from village law surfaces here, the kind that gets passed around with that half-serious, half-theatrical tone. People sometimes claim that workhouse food is so bland and so strictly rationed that you can smell it on someone's breath when they return, as if the building itself leaves a mark. Whether that is literally true is less important than what it reveals. The village wants the workhouse to feel like a place that changes you. The story makes it feel like a warning sign you can taste. You also know quietly that the workhouse is not always what village gossip makes it. Some people inside are elderly, ill-disabled, or simply unlucky. Not everyone is a moral lesson. Some staff can be cruel, some can be decent. Conditions can vary by location and management, yet the overall purpose remains clear. It is not meant to feel comfortable. This leads to one of the key questions historians continue to argue about. Were workhouses primarily instruments of social control designed to discipline the poor, or were they a flawed but genuine attempt to manage poverty in an era of rapid economic change? The answer depends on where you look, who you read, and whose voices you prioritize. In the village, the answer is often emotional rather than analytical. People fear the workhouse because it represents loss of autonomy. You feel that fear in everyday decisions. You take on extra work, even when your body protests because you cannot afford to fall behind. You accept worse conditions because the alternative feels worse. You stretch food, you mend clothing beyond reason. You borrow rather than ask for official help. All of these choices are shaped by the existence of that building and that system. You imagine a family pushed to the edge, a father injured, a mother exhausted, children hungry. The household tries to keep going, leaning on neighbours, leaning on credit, leaning on hope. Eventually, hope runs out. Someone goes to the parish officials. The decision is made. The workhouse looms. Even thinking about it makes your chest tighten. And yet the village does not entirely abandon those who fall. Sometimes neighbours bring small kindnesses, slipping food, offering help, taking in a child for a while. The village can be harsh, but it can also be protective. It does not always succeed. Poverty can overwhelm even a strong community. But the attempts matter. They show that the countryside is not only about cruelty, it is about people trying to hold each other up even when the systems above them are cold. You walk back toward your cottage, the lane darker now, and you notice how the idea of the workhouse sits alongside the church in village consciousness. The church offers moral guidance and ritual. The workhouse offers a moral warning and a threat of discipline. Both shape behaviour. Both shape reputation. Both are part of the village's architecture of fear and belonging. You step inside again and feel the contrast. Your cottage is small, damp, smoky, imperfect. But it is yours. It is your space, your family's space. Even if you rent it, even if you owe for it, it holds your life. The workhouse represents life stripped down to rules. You glance at your sleeping area, at the hearth, at the patched clothes, and you feel a surge of determination. You will do what you can to stay out of that system. Not because you think you are better than those inside, but because you know what entering would cost you. The fire crackles. Someone speaks quietly. A child shifts. The normal sounds return, and they feel precious in a way you do not always admit. You have choices here, even small ones. You can decide when to eat your last crust. You can decide how to arrange your bedding. You can decide when to step outside. In the workhouse, even those small freedoms can be taken. As the evening settles, you let the thought of the workhouse drift to the edge of your mind again. It is there, but it does not own you tonight. Tonight you are still in your cottage, still in your village, still in your own life. And that simple fact in rural England can feel like a victory. The night deepens, and with it comes the quieter sense of rules tightening around the village. Daylight feels forgiving. It hides a lot. It lets people blend into fields and lanes. But at night, every sound is clearer, every movement more noticeable, and authority, however small, feels closer. You step outside for a moment, perhaps to check the latch, perhaps to fetch something left in the yard, and you realise how quickly the countryside becomes a different place when the light fades. Policing in a rural village is not like the modern image of flashing lights and radios. It is often local, personal, and woven into daily relationships. Sometimes it is an actual constable, sometimes it is a parish officer. Sometimes it is simply the fact that everyone watches everyone, and that watchfulness becomes enforcement. Over the 19th century, organised policing expands in England, with more formal systems developing, yet in many rural areas everyday order still leans heavily on local officials and community oversight. That is a reliable broad point, and you feel it here. The village knows when a stranger arrives. The village knows when someone behaves out of line. The village remembers. You walk along the lane and notice how darkness changes the sound of your boots. Each step feels louder. You hear a dog bark sharply from a yard. You pause listening. A distant owl calls. Somewhere farther away, perhaps near the road, a cart creaks and the sound carries more than it would in daytime. The darkness makes everything feel like it has edges. You think about the kinds of trouble that can happen here. Theft, poaching, drunkenness, arguments that spill into violence. Most villages are not constant crime scenes, but they are not untouched by conflict either. People get desperate. People get angry. People drink. And when life is hard, small disputes can flare quickly. If someone steals, it might be because they are cruel, but it might also be because they are hungry. That does not make it acceptable in the village's eyes. It simply makes it complicated. A stolen chicken is not just a chicken. It is an egg supply. It is a bit of income. It is a small stability. When you lose it, you feel the loss in your body like a missing tooth you cannot stop noticing. You remember how punishment works here. Sometimes it is informal, social shame gossip that ruins someone's chances. Sometimes it is legal with fines, imprisonment, or harsher consequences. In earlier years, public punishment and local courts shape behaviour through fear. As the century goes on, the nature of punishment shifts, but the underlying lesson remains. Step too far outside the rules and you will pay, and payment can be crushing if you are already poor. You think about the local constable or watchman. He might not be a distant figure. He might be someone you see at the market, someone whose cousin is married to your neighbour. That closeness changes everything. It can make enforcement feel gentler in some cases because he knows people personally. It can also make it feel more biased because he knows people personally. If you are in a powerful family's good graces, trouble can slide off you. If you are not, it sticks. A peculiar village habit surfaces here, one of those small social mechanisms that blurs the line between law and community discipline. In some places, when there is suspicion of wrongdoing, people form informal night watches, taking turns listening, walking, shining lantern light into shadows. It is not always organised by officials. It is organised by fear and neighbourhood coordination. The village becomes its own surveillance system long before anyone uses that modern word. You return toward your cottage and notice how locked doors and bolts matter at night. During the day, a door might be left open, partly for air, partly for convenience. At night, you secure it. You check the latch twice. You might place something behind the door to make noise if it opens. These small actions are not paranoia. They are habit. They are your version of security. And yet you also know that the biggest threats are often not strangers in the dark, but pressures inside the village itself. A landlord's decisions, a dispute over money, a family feud, a drunk man stumbling home. Those are the things most likely to disturb the night. This brings you to one of the questions historians continue to explore. How much did rural order depend on formal policing and law, and how much depended on informal community enforcement, the constant social monitoring that could be as powerful as any officer? The answer is tangled. In your village, official power and unofficial power overlap. The law exists, but reputation can be just as effective at controlling behaviour. You think about the court too, even if it feels distant. Petty sessions, magistrates, the formal language of justice. These institutions can feel intimidating if you are poor. If you are summoned, you may feel the weight of being judged by people whose lives are nothing like yours. You may not understand the procedures. You may fear the costs. Even if you have done nothing wrong, the system can feel like an enemy simply because it is unfamiliar and powerful. Inside the cottage, you hear voices softer now. The day's work has turned into evening routines. Someone stirs a pot, someone mends, a child whispers, the fire settles. You feel the village outside, still watching, still present, but now held at a slight distance by your walls. You sit down and let your shoulders loosen a little. The rules of the day have been different from the rules of the night, but both have shaped you. By day you are governed by labour and weather. By night you are governed by darkness and social order. You listen for a moment to the quiet. The village is not silent, but it is subdued. A distant footstep, a door closing, a brief murmur of voices, then nothing. You feel the tension ease just a fraction. Tonight, at least the night is peaceful. And as you prepare to sleep, you understand that rural life is not only physical hardship, it is also living within a web of authority, formal and informal, where safety and control are always intertwined. You cannot fully escape it. You can only learn its rhythms obey when you must bend when you can, and hope the village's watchful eye stays calm until morning returns. When you think of clothing in this world, you do not think of trends. You think of survival stitched into fabric. You think of warmth measured in layers. You think of dignity held together by thread that has already been pulled too many times. Even now, as the evening settles and the day's roughness clings to your skin, you find yourself noticing what you wear and what it says about you, not because you want to impress, but because clothing is one of the few outward signs of stability you can control. You sit near the hearth and look down at your sleeve. The patch you added weeks ago is holding, but barely. The stitching is uneven. The fabric around it is thinning. You pinch the cloth between your fingers and feel how tired it is, like a person who has worked too long without rest. You know you will have to mend again soon. You always will. In rural England during the 19th century, clothing for working people is often expensive, relative to income, and frequently made to last through repeated repair. That is a steady point supported by many observations of working life. People own fewer garments than modern wardrobes, and each piece is used hard. A shirt is not something you casually replace. It is something you care for, patch, and keep going until it can no longer pretend to be whole. You think about how clothes come into being here. Some are bought second-hand, some are made at home if someone has the skill and time. Some are handed down, shifting from adult to child, from older sibling to younger. A garment can live multiple lives, altered and resized, becoming less about one person and more about the household's continuity. You pick up a needle and thread if you have them, or you watch someone else do it. The needle flashes in firelight. The thread slides through cloth with a soft, persistent sound. Mending is a quiet craft, one that often happens in the evening, because daylight has been spent on heavier work. The house is still not private, not silent, but evening creates a gentler pocket where hands can do fine tasks. You repair a tear and it feels oddly satisfying. There is something calming about making order with small movements. You push the needle through, pull it back, tighten the stitch, repeat. It is repetitive, but the repetition has a different mood than field labour. It is slower. It asks for attention rather than force. As you mend, you notice how clothing marks class. The better off wear, finer cloth, better cuts, cleaner colours. The poor wear coarser fabric, darker tones, and the constant evidence of repair. Yet even among the poor you see differences. One family might manage to keep collars clean, to keep shoes in better condition, to keep children's hair neat. Those details become signals. They can affect how you are treated by employers and neighbours. It is harsh, but it is real. People read clothing like a message. Shoes especially feel like a lifelong issue. Boots cost money. They wear out quickly in mud and hard work. If you have good boots, you protect them. You grease them. You mend them. You keep them away from the worst puddles if you can. If you have poor boots, you feel it in your bones, because wet feet can turn a cold day into illness. Children's shoes are often the most painful sight because children grow and leather does not. A strange little clothing-related practice comes to mind. One of those domestic habits that sounds almost superstitious, but is also practical. Some people keep a scrap of cloth from an older garment, even after the garment is beyond repair, and sew it into a new one, as a kind of continuity, a quiet charm, a way of carrying luck or family memory forward. It is not official tradition everywhere, but you can imagine it easily. When you have so little, nothing feels truly disposable. You also think about how clothing changes through the season. In winter, you layer heavily wrapping scarves, pulling caps down, adding whatever extra cloth you can find. In summer, you still cover skin because sun and insects are harsh, and because modesty norms remain strong. Women's clothing can restrict movement, yet women work anyway, tying up skirts, adapting, improvising. Men's clothing is often simpler, but it is still constrained by what they can afford. No one is dressing purely for comfort. Comfort is a luxury, and here it is rationed. The village contains its own standards. Too flashy can invite suspicion, too shabby can invite judgment. You aim for the narrow middle, respectable enough not to be shamed, plain enough not to seem arrogant. Clothing becomes a social negotiation, even when you would rather not think about it. There is also the question historians debate when they look at working-class dress and identity. To what extent did clothing choices allow people to express individuality, and to what extent were they strictly determined by economic constraint and social expectation? You can feel again that the truth is mixed. There are small decisions you can make, a ribbon if you can afford it, a particular way of tying a scarf, a patch placed neatly rather than roughly. These are tiny expressions of self, but the larger shape is defined by necessity. As the evening continues, you watch someone brush and fold clothing, preparing for tomorrow. Clothes are not thrown in a pile. They are cared for because they must last. If there is a clean garment, it is saved. If there is a wet garment, it is hung near the hearth. The cottage becomes a drying room, a storage room, a dressing room, all at once. You feel the day's grime on your own skin and consider washing again, but water is heavy and cold and fuel is precious. You compromise. You wipe your hands, your face, perhaps your feet if you can manage it. You change if you have a slightly cleaner shirt. Then you place the worn one where it might dry a little overnight. You lean back, letting the fire warm your knees, and you think about how clothes carry stories. The stain on the hem from a rainy day, the patch from a fall in the field, the worn elbow from leaning on tools. Every mark is a record. Your clothing is not just what covers you. It is a quiet diary written in fabric and thread. And as you prepare for sleep, you feel the comfort of layers around you, imperfect but familiar. The cloth is rough, but it is yours. It holds your warmth. It holds your effort. It holds your place in the village. Tomorrow you will put it on again and step back into the same world. Tonight for a few hours it becomes your soft boundary. Against the cold, your thin armour, your stitched together proof that you are still standing. Evenings in the village do not always belong to exhaustion. Not entirely. You might think they would because your body is sore, your hands are rough, your back feels like it has been carrying the whole countryside. But people have always found ways to make life feel like more than labour. In rural England, leisure exists not as endless free time, but as small windows that open when the day's essential tasks are done. Those windows can be narrow, but they let in air. You sit near the hearth as the fire settles into a calmer glow. The room smells of smoke and supper, and the voices in the cottage shift in tone. Work talk fades. Someone tells a small story. A child tries to make another child laugh. The sound is softer now, less urgent. Outside the village, lanes quiet, but you can still hear life moving. A door closing, a distant murmur. A dog barking once, and then stopping as if it remembers it is supposed to be asleep too. Leisure in this world is often communal, because private entertainment is limited. You might have a book if you're unusually lucky, but most households do not. You might have a newspaper occasionally brought from town, shared and reread until it falls apart. More often, entertainment is human. It is song, story, gossip, and simple games. A well-established reality is that rural communities sustain rich traditions of oral storytelling, music, seasonal festivities, and social gatherings across the 19th century, even as industrialization changes the wider society. You feel it in the way people brighten when someone begins a familiar tune. You feel it in the way older people remember verses and children try to copy them. Sometimes the leisure is at home. You might sing quietly while mending. You might hear a fiddle if someone in the household plays. The instrument is not polished, the tune is not perfect, but the sound fills the cottage and makes the walls feel less close. A song can pull you out of your own tiredness for a few minutes, and that matters more than musical quality. Sometimes leisure is outside at the pub or alehouse, if your village has one, and if you can afford the drink. A pint is not just a drink. It is a social ticket. The alehouse is where men gather, and sometimes women too, depending on local custom. It is where stories grow larger, where laughter is louder, where grievances are aired. It can also be where trouble begins because drink loosens restraint, and the village's simmering tensions can boil over. If you step into an alehouse, the smell hits you first. Yeast, smoke, sweat, wood, the warmth inside feels almost luxurious compared to the damp outdoors. Voices overlap. Someone slaps the table. Someone leans in close to whisper. The light is dim and amber. You feel your shoulders loosen slightly, like your body recognizes this is a place where it is allowed to relax, at least for a moment. You might not go often. Money again draws the boundary. Yet even without the pub, people still gather. In someone's cottage, outside in summer, at a fair, at a church social event. Leisure in the village is not always separate from work. It is woven into it. A group of women might chat and laugh while shelling peas. Men might tell jokes while repairing a fence. Children might play while adults talk. The line between labour and leisure is blurred, and perhaps that is why it feels so precious when it appears. A curious little leisure custom comes to mind, one that shows how entertainment can be improvised out of almost nothing. In some villages, people play simple games that rely on rhyme memory and quick wit, like competitive storytelling, or word games where the loser might owe a small favour or have to sing a verse. No expensive equipment, no special venue, just people and language turning the evening into something lighter. You listen to someone tell a story, perhaps about a local character, someone known for odd behaviour or a past scandal. The story grows in the telling. It becomes funnier, sharper, more dramatic. Everyone knows the truth is bent, but that is part of the pleasure. You laugh, careful not to laugh too loudly, because the children are half asleep, but you laugh anyway. You feel how leisure serves a purpose beyond entertainment. It is relief, it is bonding, it is the village reminding itself that it is more than work. It can also be a subtle way of negotiating power. Songs can contain satire. Stories can criticize the landlord without naming him. Jokes can hint at grievances that cannot be spoken openly. In that sense, leisure becomes a safe space for expression. This leads to a question historians continue to explore. Did rural leisure practices mainly reinforce community cohesion and traditional values, or did they provide a quiet outlet for resistance and social critique? Again, the answer is not one thing. A village dance can be pure joy. It can also be a chance to observe, to judge, to choose alliances. A pub conversation can be friendly or political, depending on who is present and what the moment allows. You think about fairs too, the larger bursts of leisure that arrive seasonally. A fair brings noise and colour, Stalls, rides, music, the smell of food that is not daily food. Fairs can feel almost unreal, like the world has turned up its brightness for a day. People save for them. They dress a little better. They flirt, they gamble, they laugh, they sometimes regret things afterward. That is part of the point. It is a release valve. Back in the cottage, leisure might be quieter. You might watch children play with a simple toy, a carved piece of wood, a rag doll. You might hear an older relative recite a poem remembered from youth. You might simply sit and listen to the fire, letting the crackle become your evening soundtrack. Your body is still tired. Leisure does not erase that, but it changes the mood of the tiredness. It makes it less lonely. It gives the day a softer edge. As the evening moves on, the voices in the cottage fade again. Someone yawns. Someone stirs the embers. The laughter becomes quieter. The story ends. The song trails off. You feel the calm settle in like dust in a beam of light, and you realise something simple. In rural England, leisure is not an extra. It is a necessity, just like bread and fire, because without it, the days would be nothing but effort. With it, even briefly, life becomes bearable. For a few minutes, you are not only a worker, you are a person sharing warmth and sound and story, letting the night wrap gently around you before sleep arrives. The evening has softened the village, and the cottage holds a warmer kind of quiet, now the sort that makes people speak more gently, even if they do not mean to. The fire is lower, the shadows are longer, and the day's noise has drained away into the hedges outside. This is the hour when thoughts drift toward companionship, toward the human urge to be chosen by someone, even in a world where love must squeeze itself between rent reputation and the simple lack of space. You notice courtship first in the way people glance at one another. Not dramatic, not like a stage play, but quick and careful, because everyone is always watching. A young woman passes a gate, and a young man happens to be there, and they exchange a look that lasts half a second too long. Someone laughs at a joke that is not that funny, and you feel the meaning underneath. Someone lingers after church a little longer than necessary. Someone walks the long way home, just in case another person is also walking the long way home. It is easy from the outside to imagine romance as purely personal, a private choice between two hearts. In rural England, it is rarely that simple. The village is small, families are close, money is tight, employment can depend on who approves of you. Even your ability to rent a cottage can depend on connections and goodwill. So courtship becomes a careful dance, part emotion, part strategy, part survival. A firmly grounded reality of the time is that marriage is deeply tied to economic stability and social standing, especially for working families. People may marry for affection, yes, but they also marry with an eye on whether the household will cope. Can you feed children? Can you pay rent? Can you keep a roof? These questions are not unromantic in the village sense. They are simply the air you breathe. You sit near the hearth and imagine the young couple trying to find privacy. In a world that barely offers it, where do you talk without being overheard? The lane is public, the cottage is crowded, the churchyard is full of eyes. Even a walk in the fields can feel exposed because someone's cousin is always tending sheep nearby, pretending not to listen while hearing everything. So you learn the village methods. You speak in half sentences. You use errands as excuses. You meet by the pump or the well because it looks practical. You walk together, but not too close, not unless you are ready for the whole parish to decide what it means. The village reads body language the way it reads weather. And when you do get a moment alone, it is rarely perfect. The ground is damp, the wind is cold, your feet ache. Yet the moment still matters because it is yours, carved out of a day that belongs to everyone else. You might stop near a hedge and listen to your own breathing, suddenly aware of how close another person is, how their presence changes the air around you. You might feel your face warm, even in winter. You might feel your hands grow awkward, unsure what to do with themselves. There are small tokens, two quiet signs that say more than words. A ribbon, a flower tucked where it will be seen, a piece of baked goods offered and accepted, a simple gift that is not expensive but is chosen with intention. And then there are the charming, slightly ridiculous bits of folk practice that float around romance like drifting feathers. Someone tells you that if you peel an apple in one long strip and toss the peel over your shoulder, the shape it makes on the floor will reveal the initial of the person you will marry. You might laugh, but you might still try it, because why not? In a life full of hard truths, a soft superstition can feel like a warm hand. When courtship becomes serious, the village becomes serious with it. Families begin to watch more closely. Questions are asked, sometimes gently, sometimes bluntly. Is he steady? Does he drink too much? Does she work well? Is her family respectable? Who owes money to whom? Who has a reputation for trouble? A marriage does not only unite two people. It links two sets of relatives, two networks of favours and grudges, two future lines of responsibility. And then there is the formal side, the part that makes it feel real in the eyes of the parish. Bans are read in church, names spoken out loud on Sundays, a public announcement that invites anyone with an objection to raise it. It is an old system that still carries weight through the 19th century, and it means your private choice becomes public information. You sit in the pew and hear the names, and you feel the little spark that travels through the congregation. Heads tilt, eyes flicker, someone smiles, someone frowns. Your life is now a village topic. Marriage itself can be modest or slightly grand depending on means, but even a simple wedding costs something. Clothing might be borrowed, food might be saved for. A small celebration might happen, because even poor households find ways to mark a turning point. People want a memory bright enough to carry through harder months. Yet for all the ceremony, the practical consequences arrive quickly. Two people, who once had only themselves to manage, now become a household unit with shared burdens. If you move into a cottage together, you immediately feel how tight the space is. Two bodies sharing a bed, sometimes children nearby, sometimes an older relative in the same room. Privacy is not a given. It is negotiated, stolen in seconds, found in the quiet glance across a room when no one is looking. You learn the intimacy of everyday partnership, which is less about grand declarations and more about small coordination. Who gets up to stir the fire? Who carries water? Who mends what? Who comforts a child? Who deals with a neighbour's sharp tongue? The romance, if it is there, lives inside those tasks. Sometimes marriage is affectionate, sometimes it is simply functional. Often it is both, depending on the day. You might feel deep tenderness when your partner brings you a cup of tea without being asked. You might feel sharp irritation when they spend a coin you wanted to save. You might feel love and resentment in the same hour. The village does not have the luxury of thinking that a good marriage is always easy. A good marriage is often one that holds, that endures, that keeps the household afloat. There is still a lively scholarly argument about what mattered most in working people's marriages in rural areas. Some researchers emphasize emotional companionship and mutual support, pointing to letters and recollections that show real affection. Others highlight economic necessity and social constraints, suggesting that survival pressures shaped choices more strongly than romance. Sitting here by the fire, you suspect both are true. People are not machines. They can love and calculate at the same time. And then there is the quiet reality of conflict. In a cramped cottage, tensions have nowhere to disperse. A harsh word echoes. A silence becomes heavy. A disagreement about money or work can feel enormous because everything is already stretched thin. You do not have separate rooms to cool off in. You do not have a private place to rage. You learn to swallow things. You learn to apologize quickly. Or you learn to harden, depending on the household and the people in it. For women, especially, marriage can bring both security and restriction. A husband's wages might help stabilize the home, but the social and legal expectations can also limit a woman's freedom. Still, women find ways to influence household decisions, to manage resources, to build networks of support. Men too carry pressures, expected to provide, expected to maintain authority, even when the world offers them little control. Gender roles feel solid in the village, yet real life keeps pushing against neat categories. You think about how courtship and marriage affect the wider village. A marriage can soften a feud. It can also inflame it if someone feels slighted. It can shift alliances. It can rearrange the daily flow of who visits which cottage, who borrows from whom, who sits near whom at church. In a small place, one union can change the emotional geography. As the night grows quieter, you imagine a newly married couple lying in bed, listening to the wind in the thatch, hearing children breathe nearby, feeling the bed's straw mattress crackle when they move. The romance is not candlelight and velvet. It is closeness in a cold room. It is warmth shared because there is no other way to stay warm. It is whispered words that must stay quiet because someone else is sleeping, only a few feet away. You let the fire's glow soften your own thoughts. Courtship, marriage, and love in this countryside are not separate from labour. They are braided into it. They happen in the margins, in the pauses, in the shared work, in the shared worry. Yet they still happen because people keep being people even when life is hard. And as you sit there, letting the day release its grip, you feel how a village romance is never only about two hearts. It is about a whole community leaning in, a whole economy pressing down, and two ordinary people trying to build something steady inside, a world that rarely offers steadiness for free. As the night grows deeper and the cottage settles, your thoughts drift toward a subject people handle with careful voices and careful euphemisms: birth, death, and the rituals that wrap around them. In a rural village, these moments are not rare events. They are part of the rhythm. They arrive in the same cottages where you eat and sleep, among the same neighbours you see every day. The community knows when someone is expecting. The community knows when someone is failing. There is very little that stays private for long. You feel it in the way people speak when a woman's belly begins to show. They do not always say pregnant directly. They may say she's in the family way or expecting. There is excitement, yes, but also worry. Everyone knows childbirth can be dangerous. Everyone has heard of women who did not survive it, or babies who did not. Even when it goes well, it can still feel like walking along a narrow edge. Midwives are crucial here. They are the village's experts, in a realm that doctors may not always enter, especially for poorer families. The midwife's reputation matters. People speak her name with respect. They remember who she saved, who she could not save. Her hands carry knowledge that comes from experience rather than formal schooling. When labour begins, someone is sent running because time becomes urgent in a way that makes the whole household hold its breath. A broadly supported reality is that for many rural families in the 19th century, childbirth typically happens at home with the assistance of midwives and other women in the community. And maternal and infant mortality remains a serious risk by modern standards. You may not use the phrase mortality rate, but you know the danger in your bones. It shapes how you prepare, it shapes how you pray. You picture the cottage rearranged for birth, the bed moved closer to the hearth for warmth, hot water heating, cloths boiled if possible, a candle ready. The room becomes a small improvised medical space. Men are often pushed out or sent away pacing outside or sitting in a corner with nowhere to put their fear. Children are shuffled to neighbours. The women gather not only to help but to witness to steady one another. The air fills with tension, sweat and whispered instructions. There are also the small customs that travel alongside, birth a blend of practical care and folk belief. Someone might keep certain herbs nearby. Someone might insist the windows should be opened at a key moment to let the baby's spirit enter freely, or to let bad air escape. A small token might be placed under the pillow for protection. These practices can vary by region and family, and not everyone believes them equally, but they show the same human impulse. When you face something frightening, you reach for rituals. After birth, if all goes well, relief pours through the house like warm water. The baby's cry is not only sound, it is proof of survival. The mother's breathing steadies, the midwife's face relaxes. Someone finally sits down and realizes their hands are shaking. Then comes the practical work again. Washing, feeding, keeping the mother warm, keeping infection away as best you can. The household shifts to a new rhythm, one shaped by an infant's needs. Baptism often follows, sometimes quickly. because the fear of infant death is real. The church is not just a religious institution here. It is where life milestones are officially marked. A baby carried to the font becomes part of the parish's recorded life. Names are chosen with care, often repeating family names, honouring relatives, anchoring the child in a lineage that can outlast individual bodies. You also think about death because it is never far away in village consciousness. The same cottage that welcomes a baby can also become a place of vigil. Illness can turn quickly. An accident in the field can end a life. A fever can sweep through. Old age can thin a person until they are more breath than body. When someone is dying, the household rearranges itself again. People come to sit with the dying person. Someone holds their hand, someone wipes their brow. The fire is kept steady. The room quiets in a way that feels heavier than silence. When death happens, it is not hidden. The village knows. Bells might toll, neighbours come, food is brought. Even poor households try to honour the dead with whatever dignity they can afford. A burial is not only a religious duty, it is a social event, a communal recognition that a life has ended. A strange little funeral-related belief comes to mind, one that feels both eerie and tender. Some villagers insist that mirrors should be covered when someone dies or that clocks should be stopped at the moment of death. Not everyone does it, and meanings vary, but the practice reveals something. People want to mark the boundary between life and death in a visible way. They want the household itself to acknowledge the shift. The churchyard becomes the final stage. The earth is cold, the grave is dug. People stand close together. Coats pulled tight, hands clasp faces, solemn. The words are spoken, the body is lowered. Dirt falls with a sound that can echo inside you for days. Then life continues because it must. But it continues with a new absence, like a missing piece of furniture in a room. You keep reaching for someone who is no longer there. These rituals also highlight an ongoing debate among historians. To what extent did rural communities find comfort and meaning in religious and communal rituals around birth and death? And to what extent were these rituals shaped by fear and social expectation rather than personal faith? Again, the answers vary. Many people found real solace in prayer and ceremony. Others may have participated because it was what the village did, the only available language for grief and hope. You feel the weight of these moments in how the village treats widows and orphans. A widow might become vulnerable economically, especially if the household relied on her husband's wages. The village might help, but help is limited. A child without parents might be taken in by relatives or placed out in service. The community tries to absorb loss, but it does not always have the resources to do so gently. You sit by the fire and think about how quickly life can change here. One day you're working in a field thinking about rent and bread. The next day you are holding a newborn or standing by a grave. The village has seen this cycle so many times that it has built rituals to manage it, like rails along a dangerous path. The night feels quieter now, as if the cottage itself has lowered its voice. You hear the wind outside steady and indifferent. You hear the fire's soft crackle. You imagine a baby's tiny breath, a dying person's slow exhale. The bells toll, the churchyard soil. These images drift through you, not as drama but as reality, as part of what it means to live in rural England. And as you prepare to sleep, you carry a strange mixture of feelings. Fear, yes. Respect, gratitude. The awareness that life here is fragile and precious, precisely because it is not guaranteed. Birth and death are not separate events in this village. They are threads woven through the everyday, reminding you that even the hardest labour is in the end in service of something simple. Keeping the people you love alive and honouring them when you cannot. You wake again into another day, and the first thing you feel is not optimism. It is the weather pressing at the edges of your senses. The air has a different taste. The light through the small window looks slightly altered. The wind sounds sharper against the thatch. In rural England, the weather is never just something you notice. It is something you negotiate with, something that can ruin a plan or rescue one, something that decides whether your work will be productive or pointless. You step outside and lift your face toward the sky, a grey ceiling of cloud. A fine drizzle that is not quite rain, but still manages to soak you. The smell of wet earth rises immediately rich and heavy. Your boots meet mud that feels more determined than yesterday's. You can almost hear the fields sighing, as if they know today will be slow, sticky work. Weather shapes everything. It shapes when you plant, when you harvest, when you can dry hay, when you can travel to market. It shapes health too. Damp cold seeps into joints and makes old injuries speak up. Wet clothes cling and chill you. In winter, frost can turn the ground hard as stone. In summer, heat can make the air feel thick and draining. You learn to read the sky not as scenery, but as instruction. A steady, widely acknowledged reality is that rural livelihoods in the 19th century are highly vulnerable to weather variability, with rainfrost, drought and storms affecting crop yields, work opportunities and food security. You do not need a historian to tell you that. You have felt it in hungry winters and anxious harvests. When the weather is bad, work does not always stop. Often, it simply becomes harder. You might still have to go out and tend animals, because cows and chickens do not pause their needs for drizzle. You might still need to carry water, because thirst does not care about mud. You might still be sent into a field to pull weeds or dig drains, because the land must be managed even when it resists. On a wet day, you do different tasks. You might repair tools under shelter. You might mend fences that have sagged. You might clear ditches so water does not drown the crops. You might cut and stack fuel. The day becomes an adaptation. You learn to be flexible, because stubbornness wastes energy. You also learn to protect yourself from the weather in small ways. A cap pulled low, a scarf tied tighter, a cloak if you have one, a layer of oiled cloth if you are lucky. Most of the time you simply get wet and accept it, then try not to stay wet for too long. You dry clothes near the hearth. You hang boots where they will warm. You rub your hands together until feeling returns. A strange little weather superstition flickers through your mind, the sort of thing people repeat with a knowing smile. Some villagers swear that certain signs predict weather with eerie accuracy, like the way a cat washes its face, or the way smoke curls from a chimney, or the direction birds fly at dusk. You might not treat it as science, but you still notice it because you cannot afford to ignore any possible clue. When your livelihood depends on a few dry days, you become attentive to every hint. And yet you know weather prediction is not perfect. The sky can lie. A morning can look promising and turn cruel by noon. A storm can arrive from nowhere. You carry that uncertainty like a quiet tension in your chest. It influences your mood. It influences the village's mood too. People speak differently when rain persists. They grow quieter. They sigh more often. They look at the sky with a kind of resentment, as if the clouds are personal enemies. You think about storms because storms are not only uncomfortable, they can be catastrophic. Wind can tear at thatch. Rain can flood low areas. Lightning can strike a barn. In a village built of wood and straw and close-packed buildings, fire from lightning is a genuine terror. After a storm, people check on one another, not always out of sentiment, but out of necessity. A neighbour's damaged roof can mean they need help. And if they need help now, you might need help later. The village is a web, and weather shakes the whole web. This leads into a question historians continue to debate in various forms. To what extent did rural communities develop robust coping strategies for weather shocks through communal support and local knowledge? And to what extent were they fundamentally exposed and vulnerable, with hardship intensified by economic structures like rent wages and market prices? Again, both truths exist. Villages share labour during haytime, help rebuild after storms, and support the sick. Yet they cannot control the price of grain, the demands of landlords, or the broader economic forces that determine how much cushion a family has when the weather turns bad. You step into the fields anyway because the day demands it. Your hands feel cold and damp. Your tool handle is slick. You adjust your grip and begin. Each movement is heavier in wet conditions. Mud clings to the blade, soil sticks and refuses to fall away. Your boots feel like they are gaining weight with every step. You can feel the fatigue arriving early. At midday, the rain might ease for a moment, and you catch a brighter patch of sky. You feel a surge of relief that seems slightly ridiculous compared to the scale of your life. But you take it anyway. You let your shoulders relax for a second. You breathe in air that smells cleaner. Then the drizzle returns, and you go back to work. In the evening, the weather changes how the cottage feels. Damp air inside makes everything feel colder. Smoke hangs lower. Clothes take longer to dry. The bed feels slightly moist. You might hear water dripping from the eaves. You might smell mildew in corners. Your bones ache more. You sit closer to the hearth, and the fire becomes not just comfort, but defense against the creeping damp. You think about seasons again, but now you think about them through the lens of weather events. A late frost that kills blossoms, a wet summer that ruins hay, a drought that cracks the earth. These are not abstracts, they are memories in the village stories told for years. Remember the year the rain didn't stop. Remember the year the crops failed. Weather becomes part of community identity. You lie down at night and listen to rain against the thatch, a soft, steady tapping that can almost feel soothing if you ignore what it means for tomorrow's work. The sound is like a lullaby made by the sky, but behind it is the knowledge that too much rain can be hunger later. Still, you let yourself feel the soothing part too, because you need something gentle in this life. You pull the blanket up and try to find warmth. You close your eyes and picture a clear day, a dry field hay stacked safely, the sun warming your back. You let that image sit in your mind like a small candle. And as you drift towards sleep, you understand the weather's true power. It is not only about comfort, it is about control. It is the force that no one owns, no one can command, and yet everyone must obey. In rural England, you live under that rule every day, listening to the wind, smelling the rain, reading the clouds, like they are letters written for you, whether you want to read them or not. As the years pass in your mind, you begin to notice the countryside changing in ways that are subtle at first, then harder to ignore. It is not a sudden transformation like a storm. It is more like a slow tide creeping up the shore. New sounds in the distance, new kinds of goods in the market, new rhythms that do not quite match the old ones. Rural England in the 19th century does not exist in a bubble. The world presses in, and one of the strongest pressures is industrialization. You might not use that word, you might simply say, there's work in the town, or they're building something over there, or my cousin left and says the wages are better. Yet even without the term you feel the pull. Towns grow, factories demand labour, railways extend their lines, and the village, even when it tries to remain itself, begins to shift under the weight of those changes. The first change you notice is in travel. A road improved, a new route used more often, a cart that passes with unfamiliar goods. Then you hear talk of the railway. Someone has seen it. Someone has heard it sound a hard metallic roar that feels unreal compared to birds and wind. Over the century, railway expansion links rural areas more closely to towns and markets, and that is a stable, widely recognised fact. It changes what can be moved, how fast and at what cost. It changes what near means. You imagine standing near a line watching a train rush past. The ground vibrates, the air smells of smoke and oil. The noise is startling like a giant animal. Children gape, older people frown. Some feel wonder, some feel dread. For some it is promise, for others it is disruption. The railway does not ask if you are ready, it arrives. Markets change too. Goods come in from farther away. Prices can shift. A bad harvest in one area might be offset by grain shipped from another. That can help, but it can also undermine local stability. Competition grows. Farmers may adopt new practices or new machines, and those machines can reduce the need for labourers. A mechanical reaper, a threshing machine, anything that speeds harvest can feel like a marvel if you own it, and like a threat if you depend on wages. You feel the tension in the village's conversations. Some people say progress is good, others say it steals livelihoods. Both might be right depending on where you stand. If you are a labourer, the fear is simple. If a machine replaces your hands, what do you eat? If you are a small farmer, struggling, the hope is also simple. If a machine saves time and increases output, maybe you survive. Progress is not a moral story here. It is a bargaining chip in survival. A curious little rural response to mechanisation surfaces one that feels almost like folklore, but is rooted in real anxiety. People sometimes speak of machines as if they have moods, as if the new equipment can be cursed or blessed. Someone might claim that a particular machine always breaks because it was built with bad luck, or because the owner angered someone, or because the village itself resents it. This kind of talk can be half joke, half genuine discomfort with change. When something unfamiliar enters your world, you make stories to explain it. The village also changes as people leave. Young men and women are drawn to towns for work, for independence, for wages that can be higher than rural labour offers. They might leave as teenagers, going into service or factory work. They send back letters. They return occasionally with different accents, different clothes, different confidence. The village watches them with envy, pride, suspicion, and longing. This leads into one of the persistent debates historians explore about rural transformation. Did industrialization and urban migration primarily improve life by offering new opportunities and higher wages, or did it fracture rural communities and deepen hardship for those left behind? Again, the answer is complicated. Many individuals find better prospects in towns. Many also face brutal conditions there. Meanwhile, villages can lose their younger energy and become more strained. You notice the cultural changes too. New ideas arrive, newspapers become more common. Political talk enters even small towns, especially as the century progresses and reform movements spread. People begin to speak of rights, of votes of fairness, even if those conversations remain cautious. The village is still hierarchical, but it is no longer insulated from the broader currents. You feel it in the way people talk about the landlord, about wages, about the state. There is a new language of politics creeping into old conversations about weather and work. It does not erase the old, it adds to it. The village becomes a place where tradition and change argue quietly in kitchens and pubs. You also notice new goods, cheap manufactured cloth, tools produced in larger quantities, household items that are more uniform than the handmade ones. These goods can make life easier. They can also make local crafts less valuable. The village's economy shifts. The old balance between making and buying tilts. At the same time, not everything changes. The mud is still there, the hedges are still there, the weather still controls the crops, people still wake early, the fire still needs tending. Rural life remains demanding. Industrialization does not suddenly turn a cottage into comfort. It simply changes the options and pressures. You imagine an older villager shaking their head at the changes, telling you stories of when things were simpler. Then you imagine a younger villager rolling their eyes saying, "Simpler for whom?" Both perspectives carry truth. The past can feel simpler if you survived it. If you did not, you're not here to complain. You walk through the village and sense this mixture of old and new. A horse cart beside, a new sign advertising goods brought from town. A cottage with smoke rising as always, but inside perhaps a cheap factory made plate. A family whose eldest child has left, and whose letters are read aloud by the fire bringing the town's world into the cottage. You sit at night and let the thoughts settle. The village is still your world, but now you can feel the edges of that world being tugged. There are possibilities beyond the hedges that did not exist in the same way before. There are threats too. Uncertainty grows. The old rhythm is still there, but it is no longer the only rhythm. And as you drift towards sleep, you hear in your imagination the distant sound of a train, faint but unmistakable, like a reminder that the countryside is part of a larger story now. The 19th century is moving forward, whether you want it to or not, and rural England, with its fields and cottages and quiet endurance, is being carried along in that movement, slowly, steadily, one change at a time. With change creeping in from towns and railways, you begin to notice something else rising quietly in the countryside. Reform. Not the kind that arrives with fireworks, but the kind that arrives in pamphlets, sermons, meetings, and new rules that land on your life like a hand placed firmly on your shoulder. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes it feels like someone telling you how to live when they have never carried your water. You hear the word improvement more often now. Improvement of farming, improvement of morals, improvement of education, improvement of the poor. Some of these improvements come from genuine concern. Some come from fear of disorder. Some come from a belief that poverty is a personal flaw that can be corrected with discipline. In the village, these motives blur together, and you learn to judge reforms not by their speeches, but by how they change your day. You might attend a meeting in a schoolroom or a church hall, standing at the back because you do not feel fully invited to take up space. Someone speaks about temperance, urging people to drink less. Someone speaks about thrift, urging people to save. Someone speaks about cleanliness, urging people to wash more often. You hear the advice and think, yes, lovely, shall I wash with what water and what fuel exactly? You keep your face neutral. You have learned that sarcasm is safest when kept inside. Still, you cannot deny that some reforms touch real problems. Alcohol can ruin households. Debt can swallow wages. Dirty water can spread illness. The trouble is that reforms often focus on the behaviour of the poor rather than the structure that keeps them poor. You feel that imbalance, even if you do not phrase it in those terms. One broadly recognised historical reality is that the 19th century in Britain sees a surge of social and religious reform movements, including temperance philanthropy, education initiatives, and campaigns aimed at improving the lives and morals of the working classes. In rural areas, these movements filter in through churches, local societies, and visiting reformers. Sometimes they bring practical help, sometimes they bring judgment. You notice temperance first because the pub is such a visible part of village life. A temperance advocate might visit and speak passionately about the harm of drink. Some villagers nod because they have seen drink turn a good man into a reckless one. Others bristle because the pub is one of the few spaces where working people can feel warm and social. For some, temperance feels like a lifeline. For others, it feels like a confiscation of pleasure. You see small signs of it. A temperance tea meeting, a pledge signed with shaky handwriting, a ribbon worn to show commitment. And you see the resistance too. A man laughing it off. A woman saying quietly that her husband needs the pub because it is the only break he has. Reform becomes another village argument layered on top of older arguments about rent and weather. Then there is the world of charity. A local lady might distribute blankets. A society might offer soup in winter. A visiting group might organise a sewing circle that provides clothes. These gifts can be life-saving. They can also come with conditions spoken or unspoken. Gratitude is expected. Respectability is expected. Sometimes prayers are expected. You accept because you need to, and you also feel the sting of being treated like a lesson. A curious, slightly odd tidbit about these charity and improvement schemes is that some reformers become obsessed with teaching the poor proper habits down to the arrangement of furniture or the choice of food, as if rearranging a cottage could rearrange poverty itself. You might be told to keep things tidier, to ventilate more, to cook differently. Some advice is useful, some feels detached from reality. You listen, you nod, and then you return to your own methods, because your methods are built from necessity, not theory. Education reforms show up too. More emphasis on schooling, more insistence that children should attend. You might welcome it, but you also worry about lost labour. The village becomes a place where a child's time is increasingly contested, pulled between household need and reform ideals. A teacher might visit parents and press them. A parish official might notice absences. Even if you agree that education matters, you feel the pressure. You also notice changing attitudes toward poverty itself. Some people begin to speak of the poor as a social problem, to be managed not just as neighbours who are unlucky. Institutions, reports, committees, all these new formal structures begin to touch rural life. They classify, they measure, they decide. The village becomes less purely local and more connected to national conversations about how society should function. This is where the historian's question becomes sharp. Were 19th century rural reforms primarily beneficial, improving health literacy and opportunity, or did they primarily serve to reinforce social control, making the poor easier to manage and blame? Scholars still argue about emphasis and impact, because reforms are not one thing. They vary by region, by organiser, by intention, by outcome. In your village, you can feel the mixed reality. A free blanket can save you from cold. A lecture about morality can make you feel smaller. You also notice the rise of organised self-help among working people, not only top-down reform. Friendly societies, mutual aid groups, people contributing small amounts to support each other in sickness or death. These are not always officially celebrated, but they matter. They are working people creating their own safety nets because they know official nets have holes. You might see a man proudly paying his society dues, not because he has extra money, but because he wants some protection. You might see a woman participating in a small local group that shares skills and resources. These acts are quiet resistance to vulnerability. They say we will not rely solely on charity. We will build something ourselves. The village's moral landscape shifts too. Sermons emphasize certain values. Pamphlets circulate. People begin to judge not only actions but habits. A clean home becomes a sign of worthiness. A sober man becomes a good man. A woman who keeps her children tidy becomes respectable. These standards can encourage helpful practices. They can also become a burden, especially for those struggling hardest. As evening settles, you feel reform hovering in the background like a second set of rules. Work still demands your body, but now reform demands your behaviour, your choices, your presentation. It is exhausting to be poor and also be constantly told how to be poor correctly. And yet you cannot deny that some reforms create real improvements over time. More schooling can open doors. Better sanitation ideas can reduce illness. Organised aid can prevent some disasters. The tragedy is that the reforms that help most are often paired with judgment that hurts. You sit by the fire and listen to the quiet. The village is still itself, still muddy lanes and hedges and smoke. But it is also becoming a place where outside voices and new systems increasingly shape daily life. The 19th century does not only bring machines, it brings ideas, and ideas can be as powerful as any railway. You let your eyelids grow heavier and imagine the village as a field being planted with new values. Some seeds will sprout into genuine help, some will sprout into control. You cannot fully choose which. You can only live through it, adapt and keep your household steady in the middle of shifting expectations. As reform and industry creep closer, the countryside begins to hum with a quieter kind of pressure. Not the pressure of harvest, not the pressure of rent day, but the pressure of choice. Stay or go. Hold on to the village or step into the wider world. You feel it in conversation, in the way young people talk about towns, with a mix of fear and excitement. You feel it in older people's sighs, the way they speak of the old days, as if the old days were a place you could walk back into if you found the right lane. You walk through the village and see the signs of this tension in faces you know. A teenager who looks down the road too often, eyes drifting toward the direction of the railway. A young woman who is suddenly more careful about her clothes, as if she is preparing to be seen by strangers in a different place. A father who is proud and worried at the same time, because his son has been offered work elsewhere. A mother who folds a letter again and again until the paper goes soft at the creases. Migration is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is slow. One person leaves first, then another. Sometimes a household splits, some staying, some going. Sometimes people leave seasonally following work, then returning. But the shift is real. Over the 19th century, rural to urban migration increases as industrial towns expand and agricultural labour opportunities change, and this is a major pattern in English social history. You can feel that pattern as a pull, even if you never step onto a train yourself. The decision to leave is rarely just ambition. It is often necessity. Wages in the village can be low. Work can be seasonal. Rent can rise. Machines can reduce demand. A poor harvest can push a family to the edge. Towns promise wages, regular work, and the chance to send money home. Yet everyone also knows towns can be brutal. Smoke, overcrowding, long factory hours, disease, and a loss of the village's safety net. The village may be tight and judgmental, but it is also familiar. The town is unknown. You hear the stories. Someone says their cousin went to the city and never came back. That can mean many things. It can mean success and a new life. It can mean shame. It can mean death. The words are vague because the truth is often messy. You think about service too, because service is a common path for rural girls and boys, especially in households with limited land. A child might go to work in a wealthier home, cleaning, cooking, caring for children. The work can be hard, but it can also provide food, shelter, and sometimes a chance to learn skills. It can also place the child under strict authority, far from their family. Service is both opportunity and vulnerability. A peculiar little migration-related habit comes to mind, one that shows how the village tries to keep connection alive, even when people leave. Some families keep a small travel bundle, prepared a cloth-wrapped parcel, with a spare shirt, a bit of food, perhaps a family token, ready in case someone decides suddenly to go. It is not always spoken about openly, but it exists like a quiet acknowledgement that leaving is always possible. The bundle sits like a shadow in the corner, half practical, half symbolic. You feel the emotional weight of departure in the village's rituals. A farewell at the door. A neighbour handing over a small gift, maybe a piece of bread or a coin, because even if they are not close friends, the village understands what it is to step into uncertainty. A mother smoothing a child's hair, one last time, trying to memorize the shape of their face. A father offering advice that sounds practical, but is really love disguised as instruction. Then the person leaves, walking down the lane with a bag, boots tapping on stones, and the village watches until the figure becomes too small to see. After that, life continues because it must, but the absence is noticeable. A place at the table, a pair of hands missing in the field, a voice no longer heard at the well. The village becomes slightly quieter. Letters become more important. News from town arrives on paper, or by word of mouth through visitors. If someone can read, the letter is read aloud, and the cottage fills with distant images. Smokestacks, busy streets, new sounds. The listener's imagination stretches. You might feel envy, fear, pride, and longing all at once. This is where historians keep debating the emotional meaning of migration. Did leaving represent liberation from rural constraint, or did it represent a painful rupture from community and identity? The truth again resists simplicity. For some, leaving is freedom. For others, it is loss. For most, it is a mix. You can love your village and still need to leave it to survive. You also think about those who stay. Staying is not always a passive choice. Sometimes it is commitment. Sometimes it is attachment. Sometimes it is lack of means. Sometimes it is responsibility, caring for older relatives or holding a cottage. Those who stay might feel abandoned. They might also feel superior, telling themselves that the town will ruin those who leave. Or they might feel pride, keeping the village's traditions alive. The village itself adapts to the flow. When young people leave, labour dynamics shift. Older workers remain. Women may take on more. Children may be pushed into work earlier. The community's age balance changes. The mood changes. There can be a sense of thinning, like a fabric worn at the edges. And yet migration can also bring back new resources. Money sent home, new ideas, a daughter returning with a little savings, a son coming back with a new skill, a family improved by what the outside world provided. The village can benefit from the very departures that hurt it. As evening settles, you sit by the hearth and picture the lane as a thread connecting two worlds. One end tied to your cottage, your familiar hedges, your village's watchful eyes. The other end tied to smoky towns, railways, and unknown streets. People travel along that thread, sometimes leaving permanently, sometimes returning, sometimes carrying pieces of both worlds inside them. You feel the tug of it, even if you do not go. You feel it in your imagination. You wonder what life would be like elsewhere. You wonder if you would survive it. You wonder if you would miss the village's fields, even with all their hardship. You wonder if the town's wages would truly feel like freedom, or if they would simply be another kind of cage. You let the fire's warmth steady your thoughts. The village remains your present, but the future is no longer fixed. Choice has entered the countryside like a new kind of weather, and it brings restlessness with it. Some will leave, some will stay. Most will carry a quiet ache either way. And as you lie down to sleep, you imagine footsteps on the lane, moving away into darkness, and you listen to the night's silence that follows, heavy with possibility. The village is quieter now in your mind, as if the whole century has leaned into its late evening. You can still see the hedges and hear the wind in them, still smell smoke rising from chimneys, still feel mud clinging to boots. But the day's urgency has eased, and the bigger story has settled into something softer. What remains is the texture of ordinary life, the way it held people and shaped them, and the way people held one another in return. You sit by the hearth one last time, and it feels like you are sitting at the centre of everything you have lived through. The work, the weather, the market, the gossip, the church, the fear of poverty, the pull of towns, the slow creep of reform. It is all here, not as separate chapters, but as one continuous fabric. You think about how rural life in 19th century England is often imagined from the outside as quaint. Cottages, rolling fields, soft green. But you now know that beneath the beauty sits constant effort. Every warm meal is a victory over scarcity. Every dry shirt is a victory over damp. Every day without illness is a victory over fragility. And yet people still find laughter. People still find songs. People still find ways to love, to tell stories, to mark births and mourn deaths. The countryside is not only hardship, it is endurance with small bright threads woven through it. You remember the way the village watches and judges, and you also remember the way it helps. A neighbour lending coal, a woman bringing broth to a sickbed, someone sharing a rumour that saves you from a bad bargain. These things are not sentimental. They are practical compassion. They are the village's way of keeping itself alive. A clear historical reality that sits beneath all of this is that rural England in the 19th century is shaped by deep inequality in land ownership and power, and that inequality influences wages, housing security, and opportunity. You feel that truth in the landlord's shadow, in rent-day nerves, in the fear of the workhouse, in the way machines and markets can change your life without asking you. You also feel how people adapt within those limits, learning to stretch, to patch, to borrow, to cooperate, to endure. And then your mind drifts to a small, odd human detail again, something that feels almost tender in its strangeness. In some places, people keep tiny memory objects from their working lives, a worn button from a long-gone coat, a smooth stone from a field. They always cleared a little token, kept in a drawer, not for money, but for meaning. It is a way of saying this life happened, this work mattered, I was here. Even if no one writes your story down, you write it into your hands and into small keepsakes. There is still a question that historians continue to wrestle with when they look back at rural life. Was the countryside primarily a place of stability and community, offering people belonging and tradition, or was it primarily a place of constraint and exploitation, trapping families in hardship? The truth is not one answer. It depends on where you stand. It depends on whether your cottage felt like shelter or like a cage. It depends on whether the village's watchful eyes felt like protection or like pressure. You can feel how both experiences can be true in the same place, even in the same household, even in the same person. Now the day in your mind begins to slow down, and you let it. You let the pacing soften. You let the images become gentler. You hear the wind again, less like a threat and more like a steady companion. You watch the fire's glow fade into embers, and you notice how your breathing matches it. Slow, warm, steady. You imagine the cottage at night. The straw mattress rustles as someone turns. A child sighs. A dog settles near the hearth. Outside the village is mostly dark with only a few window lights still glowing. The lane is quiet. The hedges stand still. Somewhere far away a train might pass in the distance, but here in this moment the countryside holds its own calm. You feel the weight of the blanket over you. It is not luxurious, but it is familiar. You feel the warmth of bodies nearby the shared heat that makes sleep possible in a small room. You hear the last small sounds of the household settling. A pot set down, a door latch checked, a final whisper. And now the story itself begins to wind down. The images you carry start to blur gently, like a lantern being lowered. You are no longer thinking about wages or landlords or markets or reform. You are simply listening to the night. You are letting the countryside's steady rhythms carry you. Wind, fire, breath. The soft creak of a cottage that has held many winters and will hold more. You remind yourself quietly that you have made it through another day in this world. You have carried water, you have worked soil, you have eaten what you could, you have kept warm enough, you have navigated neighbours' eyes and the village's rules. You have endured. And as you let your eyelids grow heavier, you allow the final feeling to be not fear, not pressure, not even worry, but something calmer, a sense of belonging to the night itself. The countryside does not demand anything from you now. It simply surrounds you dark and still and steady. You breathe in slow and deep and you let the smell of smoke and straw fade into a softer memory. You breathe out and the day releases you. The village settles, the century settles, the story settles. Now dim the lights, let your thoughts drift like mist over fields, and let sleep come the way it comes on a quiet rural night, gently, patiently, without hurry. You are lying there now, and the last pieces of the village have become softer, like a watercolour left out in light. The hedges are no longer sharp lines. The lane is no longer a route you must walk. It is simply a quiet ribbon in the dark. The cottage around you feels warmer than it did earlier, not because the fire is strong, but because your body has finally stopped fighting the day. You let your mind return to the simplest sounds, the faint crackle of the embers, a distant owl call that seems to echo and then vanish, the slow breathing of someone nearby. Each sound is a reassurance that the world is still turning, but it is turning gently. In your imagination, you can still see one small window, glowing somewhere across the village, a steady warm square in the darkness. You can still smell that familiar mix of smoke and damp earth, but none of it feels urgent now. It feels like the background of a dream, something safe and far away. You allow your shoulders to loosen, your jaw unclenches. Your hands so busy all day finally rest. You do not have to hold a tool. You do not have to carry water. You do not have to watch the sky for rain. Tonight, you are simply here. If a stray worry tries to drift in, you let it pass like a cloud. You do not chase it. You do not argue with it. You just watch it float away over the sleeping fields, leaving the air clearer behind it. The countryside grows quieter with every breath you take. The village's voices fade. The market noise is gone. The church bells are silent. Even the old anxieties, rent day and hunger and hard weather, become distant like stories someone told you long ago. You breathe in and you imagine cool night air. You breathe out and you imagine warmth spreading through your chest. Your thoughts slow. Your mind becomes still enough to let sleep settle in like a soft blanket. And in that stillness, you can almost hear a final whisper from the old countryside itself. Not demanding, not warning, just soothing, as if it is saying you did enough today. You can rest now. Sweet dreams.